Thank you. Next speaker is Algeria.
President.
Thank you, President. My delegation wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of China. We thank them for the presentation of their report. In a constructive spirit, we'd like to make the following recommendations to China. 1. Pursue a policy of building affordable social housing and renew dilapidated housing to improve the living conditions of the population. 2. Step up financial aid to children in difficulty to guarantee their right to mandatory schooling. 3. Improve the administration of religion, bringing it into line with the national laws. We've studied with interest the third national report. We congratulate them for their plan of action for promoting human rights. We note with satisfaction the measures taken to guarantee the rights of ethnic minorities and encourage them to accelerate the development that ethnic minorities receive and in the regions where they're focused, where they're concentrated. We wish them every success.
Angola absent. Argentina.
Buenos días, damos la bienvenida.
We'd like to welcome the Chinese delegation, thank them for their presentation of the report. We congratulate them for the measures and efforts taken to mitigate and reduce poverty. Argentina would recommend to China that it considers establishing a moratorium on the death penalty, as well as the possibility of abolishing the death penalty in its legal order. We recommend the authorities take necessary measures to provide a safe environment for those working to promote and protect human rights, including human rights defenders, men and women, and journalists also, and to investigate and sanction all acts of violence against them. Finally, we recommend that the authorities take necessary measures to provide adequate, effective protection against all forms of discrimination, including discrimination motivated on sexual orientation. Thank you.
Thank you. Armenia.
Armenia welcomes the delegation of China and thanks for the presentation today. We commend the efforts of China to implement 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as the determination of the country to eradicate poverty and to create job opportunities, especially for young people. We recommend that China strengthens its efforts towards the promotion of the human rights, education, awareness-raising programs. We note the improvement in the area of gender equality as well as in socio-economic development, and recommend that China undertakes further steps to promote the role of women in decision-making and management processes. I thank you.
Thank you. The floor goes to Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Australia thanks China for its report and welcomes progress in improving some economic and social rights. Australia recommends China cease the arbitrary detention of Uyghurs and other Muslim groups in Xinjiang, cease restrictions on Uyghurs and Tibetans' freedom of movement, and allow media, UN and foreign officials access to Xinjiang and Tibet. Strengthen measures preventing torture and ill treatment. Work toward the abolition of the death penalty and publish execution data. Fully protect freedom of religion or belief by ensuring Chinese law supports the rights of individuals to freely practice their religion. Release detained human rights defenders. Expedite reforms necessary for freedom of expression to be fully protected in law and practice, and uphold the rights, freedoms and rule of law embodied in the One Country, Two Systems framework for Hong Kong.
Austria.
The delegation of China and thank them for their report. We are concerned with regard to the human rights situation in ethnic minority areas of China, including the autonomous regions of Tibet, Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia. On removal of organs, we would like to know how the Chinese authorities ensure that this is only performed with the free, informed and specific consent of the donor without exception. As recommendations, we offer to review China's national and regional security legislation to bring it in conformity with international human rights law and ensure that provisions are clearly and strictly defined. Take the necessary measures to allow all citizens to enjoy the free exercise of religion or belief, and to ensure that ethnic minorities can freely practice their religion and exercise their culture. Grant the UN High Commission of Human Rights and Special Procedures access to all regions of China. I thank you.
Thank you. I pass the floor to Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan welcomes the delegation of China and thanks the delegation for the report. Azerbaijan appreciates China's commitment to the UPR process and positively acknowledges the progress achieved since previous cycle of the UPR. Azerbaijan positively recognizes China's efforts and work in safeguarding and improving the health of women and children in the country. Azerbaijan would like to make following recommendations to China: to carry out nutrition improvement program for children in poverty-stricken areas on a larger scale, to continue to enhance public service level of radio and television. 3. Enhance publicity of law enforcement, justice, and law-abiding in Chinese human rights protection practice. 4. Consider including measures aimed at ensuring increased efficiency and accountability of public service into its national development.
Next speaker is Bahrain.
Bahrain warmly welcomes the delegation of China and thanks the presentation of the national report. We have 2 recommendations. Expand the balanced development of compulsory education and the delivery of public services in urban and rural areas. 2. Continue to implement UPR recommendations into national legislation, administrative regulations and planning in various areas of economic and social development. Bahrain commends China's efforts for the promotion and protection of human rights through the follow-up and implementation of the 3rd National Human Rights Action Plan, as well as the introduction of policies which improve, enhance and secure economic transformation. We wish China all success in its review. I thank you.
Thank you, Bahrain. Bangladesh.
Mr. Chair, we warmly welcome the Chinese delegation and appreciate their national report. China's proactive efforts to implement the accepted recommendation of last 2 cycles are indeed noteworthy. Mr. Chair, we have the following recommendations. 1. Continue to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and remaining committed to the Paris Agreement. 2. Continue increased supply of educational resources in remote, rural and ethnic minority areas. 3. Continue to promote participation, integration and sharing of development benefits with the people of vulnerable situation. Mr. Chair, Bangladesh commends the development miracle of China. The path of ensuring promotion and protection of all human rights for all people passes through the path of development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Belarus.
We note satisfaction in the successes and undoubted progress in promoting and protecting all categories of human rights. We'd also like to recommend as follows.
Participation, integration and sharing of development benefits of vulnerable groups. Second, continue to implement the counter-terrorism law and protect people from terrorist threat. And third, continue to promote economic and social development in ethnic minorities areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Belarus. Belgium.
President, Belgium welcomes the delegation of China and recommends to ensure that any legal provision to protect national security is clearly and strictly defined in its security laws in conformity with international human rights law and standards, to halt the practice of detaining ethno-religious minorities who have not been lawfully convicted for a criminal offense in re-education camps, and to release those currently detained under such circumstances, to take the necessary measures to guarantee that the human rights defenders can exercise their right to freedom of expression and to peaceful association, and finally to restrict the use of the death penalty to crimes that meet the threshold of most serious crimes under international law. Thank you.
I thank you. Next speaker is Benin.
Thank you, President. Delegation of Benin wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of China. We congratulate them for the presentation of the national report. We welcome the various measures and initiatives that the country's taken in terms of enjoyment of human rights and local development since its last UPR in 2013. We'd like to recommend to China to continue its actions and initiatives with a view to ratification of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. My delegation wishes China a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. We continue with Bhutan.
Bhutan is happy to note the efforts and progress achieved by China in fulfilling its human rights obligations. China's active participation in relevant human rights review mechanisms, enactment of new laws including general provisions of the civil law, the law against domestic violence and other initiatives signify the country's continued commitment to human rights. We commend China for raising awareness on human rights and the rule of law by training the party and government officials and members of the judiciary system. We recommend China to further strengthen its efforts in poverty reduction and implementation of SDGs and to continue improving its legal system for safeguarding the human rights of its people. I thank you, Mr.
Chairman. Thank you. Bolivia.
Thank you. We'd like to welcome the delegation of China. We welcome the improvements of the living conditions in rural areas as part of its human rights policy. We recommend 1. Establishing gradually a mechanism to guarantee safe housing for rural low-income residents. 2. Strengthen social assistance and the well-being of the elderly. 3. Improve knowledge of the law among workers, especially amongst migrant workers. 4. Continue enhancing the agricultural sector in rural communities in light of national conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolivia. Botswana.
Mr. President, Botswana warmly welcomes the delegation of China to the third cycle of the UPR process. We thank the delegation for a comprehensive national report. While we note efforts made by China in promoting human rights, we make the following recommendations. Consider establishing the National Human Rights Institution in line with Paris principles. Endeavor to promote racial harmony through improvement of equality of women of African descent. We wish China a successful review outcome. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Brazil.
Brazil warmly welcomes the delegation of China and would like to make the following 2 recommendations. Ratify the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for visually impaired persons. Take steps to establish a moratorium on death penalty while guaranteeing that those who may be subject to this penalty are entitled to adequate legal representation and to a fair trial. We encourage China to continue its efforts towards the ratification of the ICCPR. We commend China for the progress in eradicating extreme poverty. We welcome the adoption of the law on domestic violence and encourage China to keep up and enhance its efforts to combat gender violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Brunei Darussalam.
Brunei Darussalam comments that China has integrated child development into its overall national economic and social development planning and in national program for the development of child in poor areas. It solidified the system of protecting children's rights and interests and for providing them with the care and services. We like to make 2 recommendations. First, to make an active response to the aging of the population and improve the service system for assisting persons with disability. Second, to continue to incorporate women, children and elderly and disabilities into the overall national economic and social development planning. In conclusion, Brunei Darussalam wish China a successful conclusion in its 3rd UPR session. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. We continue with Bulgaria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bulgaria recognizes the progress of China in implementation of its 3rd National Human Rights Action Plan and the measures taken to eliminate absolute poverty by 2020, to increase average life expectancy and the drop of the infant mortality, as well as the integration of the women's development. Our delegation acknowledges that China's legal regulations related to re-education through labor have been repealed and urges for complete discontinuation of such practices. We encourage China to continue taking further steps aimed at effective implementation of the ratified international human rights instruments. Our recommendations: first, to consider establishment of independent national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris principles, and second, to undertake further efforts to strengthen the protection of the rights of children, persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next speaker is Burkina Faso.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, sir. This delegation would like warmly to welcome the Chinese delegation, and thanks to the delegation for its report. We much appreciate the participatory process involved in the drafting of the report just presented. China is party to 26 relevant human rights instruments, and this demonstrates the importance of their implementation internally, and we welcome that. We encourage the country to continue its promotion and protection of human rights, and we encourage China to continue its efforts to set up a Paris Principles institution. We would like to wish China every success under the UPR and wish it success in the implementation of recommendations which would arise from this UPR process. Thank you.
Thank you. Burkina Faso, Burundi, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, sir. This delegation would like to welcome the Chinese delegation and congratulate it on the report. We congratulate the Chinese government on measures to implement the recommendations accepted. We particularly congratulate China on its economic and social achievements, which are extraordinary, and the improvement of the protection of the rights of its citizens, and the increase in living standards and development issues. We recommend that China continue to focus on terrorist organizations, separatist organizations such as the Eastern Turkestan. They should continue its efforts to reduce the education gap between ethnic zones and the national average, and we wish China every success under the current UPR process. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Cabo Verde.
Thank you, sir. My delegation welcomes the distinguished Chinese delegation and thanks them for their national report. We reiterate observations made under the second cycle with regards to the extraordinary economic success demonstrated by the country and the implementation of economic development to the benefit of socio-economic rights in the country. We also note and welcome the implementation of this second National Action Plan for Human Rights 2012-2015 and the publication of the third Action Plan 2016-2020. This demonstrates the determination of the government to continue to seek ways and means to overall enhance the promotion and protection of human rights. And we...
Cambodia, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Cambodia welcomes the Chinese delegation to the 31st session and highly appreciates its comprehensive national report. We note since the second cycle, the majority of recommendations were accepted and implemented, and that China attached great importance to the UPR process, acting as an advocate to promote and protect human rights. We commend China for coordinating its four-pronged comprehensive strategy aiming at building a prosperous society. Therefore, we recommend China, first, to continue to implement its National Human Rights Action Plan. Second, punish online criminal activity according to its existing law. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks. Cameroon is next.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have three recommendations. One, continue to implement the outline program for the national and regional development of women and children to promote comprehensive development of women and children. Two, continue to protect citizens' right to know, participate, and supervise in the environmental field. Three, improve public cultural service system and provide cultural service to the impoverished people. All in all, Cameroon appraises China's effort to ensure fair public services for women, children, the elderly, persons with disabilities, people in rural and poor regions, and people in ethnic minority regions. Cameroon also notes with appreciation that the goal of strengthening the judicial guarantee of human rights set by China. I thank you.
Thank you. I pass the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are deeply concerned by credible reports of the mass detention, repression and surveillance of Uyghurs and other Muslims in Xinjiang. Canada recommends that China, 1, release Uyghurs and other Muslims who have been detained arbitrarily and without due process for their ethnicity or religion. 2, end prosecution and persecution on the basis of religion or belief, including for Muslims, Christians, Tibetan Buddhists and Falun Gong. 3, ratify the ICCPR and implement these obligations across China. 4, ensure the right of Hong Kong people to take part in government without distinction of any kind. Overall, we are concerned about the broader deterioration of human rights in China since the last UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Central African Republic.
Monsieur le Président. Sir, the Central African Republic would like warmly to welcome the Chinese delegation and congratulates the delegation on presenting its UPR report. This demonstrates a positive development in terms of implementing human rights, that is to say, establishing standards and implementing them. When it comes to the promotion of the rights of women in China, the CR would recommend that the government pay greater attention to the needs of women in the development process and to build support capacities, in particular financial support. We wish China a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite Chile to take the floor.
Chile welcomes the delegation of China. We stress the efforts this country has made in implementing the recommendations accepted during the second cycle, as well as progress in implementing Agenda 2030, which has allowed China to significantly reduce poverty indicators. We recommend 1. Continue updating national legislation to reduce the amount of crimes which are applicable for the death penalty and promote a public debate on abolition. 2. Step up national legislation and public policy to combat discrimination, including discrimination on sexual orientation and gender identity grounds. And 3. Continue developing public policy to protect the rights of the child, including elimination of all forms of exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chile. Colombia.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. We recognize the progressive progress made by China when it comes to promoting economic, social and cultural rights. We also recognize the importance of the campaign undertaken by the President to combat corruption, stresses the importance of significant drop in maternal infant mortality reported by the committee to the CRC. We recommend adhering to the second optional protocol to the Covenant of Civil Political Rights with a view to abolishing the death penalty and to promote improvements to ensure equal pay for equal work in the labour sector.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We would like to welcome the head of delegation and the delegation from the People's Republic of China. We would like to make the following recommendations: that the country continue the implementation of the National Plan for Children 2012-2020 to combat terrorism and extremism, while taking into account human rights, and thirdly, to make efforts to protect human rights and to ensure gender parity at work. We wish every success to the People's Republic of China delegation. Thank you.
Thank you. Congo.
Sir, my delegation would like warmly to welcome the Chinese delegation and congratulates it on presenting its report. China has made huge efforts to promote and protect human rights, and we welcome the reduction in the gender gap in the education system and the almost total coverage by way of radio in the country. In order to pursue such efforts, we'd like to make the following recommendations: that the country continue to improve social security cover for people with disabilities and to increase its efforts to counter water pollution. Thank you.
Thank you. Costa Rica.
Saludamos a la delegación de... I'd like to welcome the delegation of China and thank them for the presentation of their report, recognize the progress contained therein. Considering that human rights, more than a cause, are a fundamental pillar of the United Nations system, we recommend 1. Ratify the International Covenant of Civil Political Rights as well as the second optional protocol to the death penalty, 2. Develop a national plan to eradicate child labour, especially in the sectors of mining, manufacturing and production, and guarantee school integration. 3. Guarantee the promotion of freedom of association and expression for human rights defenders and minorities in line with international law and international human rights law. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa Rica. Côte d'Ivoire is next.
President, we would like warmly to welcome the Chinese delegation and congratulate the delegation on presenting its national report. We welcome governmental measures to implement recommendations from the previous UPR cycle. We also welcome the significant efforts being made by the government to promote development rights and encourage the government to continue in this way. President, we would like to recommend China to reinforce measures to counter pollution and climate change. Secondly, adopt legislation to counter trafficking in human beings, in particular trafficking for sexual exploitation and other illegal aims. And we would like to wish China every success under this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor goes to Croatia.
Thank you. Croatia welcomes the delegation of China and thanks them for the presentation of their UPR report. We welcome the efforts China has invested in implementing the recommendations from the previous cycle and developing national action plans on human rights. Croatia also commends the successes achieved in lifting millions out of poverty. As to recommendations, we recommend the government to fully respect the rights of ethnic minorities, freedom of religion and expressions of cultural identity. We also recommend China cooperate with and allow unimpeded access to international monitors, such as the relevant special procedures to investigate alleged related rights violations. Regarding Hong Kong, we recommend that the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region introduce internal legislation to implement the CRC. We wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. Cuba.
We'd like to congratulate China for its action to implement the recommendations accepted during the second UPR cycle. We highlight the efforts, extraordinary progress made in the country's development, in particular in poverty, relieving the poverty of the population. We recommend 1, continue efforts to achieving socialist modernization by 2035. 2, continue promoting constructive dialogue and cooperation for mutual benefit as part of multilateral human rights mechanisms. 3, continue promoting respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity in the work of multilateral human rights systems. 4, continue combating politicization, double standards in the field of human rights. We welcome China for its attempts to promote international relations on the basis of justice, respect and cooperation with a view to mutual benefit. We wish them every success in their UPR. Thank you.
We continue with Cyprus.
Mr. President, Cyprus welcomes the Chinese delegation and wishes to thank them for their presentation. China's intensive effort towards eradicating extreme poverty in the past 5 years is highly commendable, and Cyprus wishes to further encourage China to continue to exert every effort to bring people out of poverty. Furthermore, Cyprus understands that China has reformed its laws towards limiting the number of offences punishable by death. Towards this end, Cyprus, an advocate of the complete abolishment of the death penalty, wishes to recommend to China to further reduce the number of capital crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Cyprus. Czech Republic.
Thank you. We welcome the delegation of China, acknowledge its efforts to reduce poverty and its multilateral engagement. We make the following recommendations. Firstly, before the next UPR cycle, to set a clear timeline for the ICCPR ratification. Secondly, to guarantee fair trial, independent judiciary and access to legal counsel, release all human rights defenders, including lawyers, and refrain from persecuting those who exercise their rights or defend others. Thirdly, to ensure freedom of religion or belief, and to end detention, harassment and so-called re-education of ethnic minorities, including in Xinjiang. Finally, to repeal or amend laws and practices such as censorship, which prevent the right to freedom of expression and free access to information. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of China led by its Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. We highly commend China for its strenuous efforts and brilliant success made for the promotion and protection of human rights, and recommends the following. First, continue to fight against cult organization to safeguard welfare of people. Second, continue to implement Health China strategy. Third, continue to develop bilingual education in ethnic minority areas. Fourth, continue to strengthen and improve the work on petition and safeguard the legitimate right and interest of citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Monsieur le Président.
President, the DRC welcomes the Chinese delegation and congratulates it on its efforts to improve its legislation and institutions to protect human rights via laws and general provisions under civil law, to counter family violence and the law on charities. My delegation has the following recommendations: that the country should continue its initiatives moving towards an overall reform of the judicial system in order to bolster judicial guarantees for human rights, and also enhance cooperation for the protection and promotion of socioeconomic and cultural rights with other developing countries. We would like to wish China every success under this UPR cycle. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We continue with Denmark.
Denmark welcomes the delegation of China. Enjoyment of human rights as provided for in China's constitution and in line with applicable international obligations should be fully ensured for religious and ethnic minorities also in Xinjiang and Tibet. Denmark recommends the government to facilitate full access to Xinjiang and Tibet for all relevant UN special procedures. Within the context of the law of administration of activities of overseas NGOs, the limited number of professional supervisory units is shrinking the space for civil society in China. Denmark recommends the government to expand the list of PSUs to accommodate registration of NGOs that seeks to work in China. And Denmark recommends the government to ratify OPCAT. Thank you.
Thank you, Denmark. Djibouti.
Thank you, sir. we wish to welcome the high-level delegation from the People's Republic of China and thank it for its presentation of the national report. We note the considerable progress in terms of domestic legislation to promote and protect human rights. This is the result of the incorporation of a number of recommendations from the second UPR cycle, and there have been administrative regulations and other efforts in the area of socio-economic development. We have the following recommendations: the promotion of gender parity by improving labor law and also regulation systems for women engaged in professional activities, and secondly, enhance efforts to help children who've been abandoned by their parents in rural areas to make sure that these children in vulnerable situations are helped. We wish China every success under the CPR cycle. Thank you.
Honduras.
Honduras welcomes the presentation of the China report and welcomes achievements made in the sphere of mitigating and reducing the number of people living in poverty. We welcome the adoption and application of the third Human Rights Action Plan and the signing of the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights. And we urge it to continue its efforts towards ratification. We also recommend to China that adheres to human rights instruments that it's not a party to, such as the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights to abolish the death penalty, accede to the OPCAT and to the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their Families, finally adopt comprehensive legislation against all kinds of discrimination, promoting protection of people and marginalized groups, the exercise of political and social rights as well as economic, social and cultural rights. Thank you.
There is next.
Thank you, Chair. We'd like to wish a warm welcome to the distinguished delegation of China. We thank them for the presentation of their report. Ecuador recognized the efforts made by China to combat corruption, which reflect the national position that such acts undermine inter alia economic, social and cultural rights of the population. We stress the search for a comprehensive, innovative search and the promotion of new laws contained with the human rights focus. We would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Promote measures to guarantee that in development and infrastructure products within and outside territory are fully in line with human rights, respect for the environment and sustainability of natural resources in line with international and national legislation that's applicable and the commitments under Agenda 2030 and the SDGs.
With Egypt.
Thank you, sir. We would like to welcome the Chinese delegation, the high-level delegation, and we thank them for presenting their detailed report on efforts made in the country to promote human rights and the ongoing economic successes of the country. This has a positive impact on socioeconomic development and has drawn hundreds of millions out of poverty. We'd like to make the following recommendations: that the country continue to bolster its legislative framework to counter terrorism and to implement relevant laws, and to continue the improvement of the judicial branch in terms of focusing on human rights, and also to comply with religious freedom in the national context. Thank you.
Thank you, President. We'd like to wish a warm welcome to the delegation of China, thank them for the presentation of their report. We commend the development of programs to protect human rights as well as the third National Action Plan on Human Rights. We also recognize programs and initiatives geared towards bolstering the areas of education and health. In a constructive spirit, El Salvador respectfully recommends as follows: ratifying the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. 2. Signing and ratifying the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers and their Families. 3. Continue efforts to implement Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our list is Equatorial Guinea.
Thank you, President. Equatorial Guinea welcomes the delegation of China, and we thank them for the introduction of their report. We recognize the progress reflected therein. We recommend 1. Continue implementing the law on environmental protection, a law on controlling the air contamination, a law on protection of forest life, etc. 2. Continue implementing actions to guarantee food security. 3. Continue promoting awareness raising and education on human rights. We wish China every success in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I move the floor to Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to congratulate the delegation of China for the presentation. My delegation believes that the UPR mechanism has been able to enjoy the support of all member states because it puts all countries in the same level playing field and the state-led voluntary process that has shown concrete results. I do not want to pass this opportunity without stating that China has been a strong advocate of this mechanism and had in the past accepted most of the recommendations of the working group. I hope it will do the same this time. With that belief, my delegation would like to recommend China to continue strengthening and develop legislation that promote the protection of labor and social rights, to strengthen the technical professional education system as quality education alternative for the development of the country. I wish the delegation...
Thank you, Eritrea. Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Estonia welcomes the delegation of China to its third UPR and would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Take meaningful steps toward ratification of ICCPR and its second optional protocol. 2. Ratify the OPCAT. 3. Sign and ratify the Rome Statute of ICC and APIC. 4. Enable unrestricted use of Internet to all members of the society by ensuring cybersecurity and safe flow of information without violating the freedom of expression. 5. Enable all members of civil society to freely engage with international human rights mechanisms without fear of intimidation and reprisals. 6. Prohibit corporal punishment of children in all settings, including in the home. I thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ethiopia welcomes the delegation of China to this 31st session of the UPR. Ethiopia commends and appreciates the progress made and the achievement obtained in the field of human rights, in particular in alleviating extreme poverty through implementation of the right to development. Ethiopia commends the China's National Action Plan designed for the period 2016 to 2020 to ensure the prospect, promotion, and protection of human rights in areas such as civil and political and economic, social and cultural. Finally, we recommend China to continue the implementation of its policy on ensuring women employment and enhance equal participation of women at a strategic and operational level. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. And now I'll pass the floor to His Excellency Mr. Yucheng and his delegation to respond to the questions which have been raised so far. You have the floor, sir. You will do that. Okay, so it's the Deputy Head of Delegation.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Chinese delegation have carefully listened to the statements made by various delegations. We are thankful to many states for their recognizing the remarkable achievements made by China human rights and put forward useful recommendations. Before the session, we have received advanced written questions from various delegations. We will respond to specific issues and questions on thematic matters to make response on some questions and issues. Because of the limit of time, we will, in the second round and the third round, in our response to make response. Due to the time limitation, if we do not have in the future, we will in other forms in the future to respond to these questions, give replies. Of course, some delegates disregard achievements made by China in protection of human rights, remarkable achievements made by China, and alleging and deeming China's human rights situation has worsened. These kind of allegations and remarks do not tally with the fact. We cannot accept. Now I'd like to invite the Supreme People's Court and the Ministry of Social Security and the Health Commission and State Administration, the proposals, the complaints, and various government organizations, our colleagues, members of the delegation on death penalty, on the judicial reform, education, health, education, environment issues will give replies to these questions.
The mic is not on. Bulgaria, Burundi, and other countries.
Okay.
You turned off. First, on the issue of judicial safeguards for human rights, China has made great efforts to promote the reform of the trial-centered criminal procedure system, with the rules of no penalty without the law, presumption of innocence, and exclusion of illegally obtained evidence. We have the legal aid and judicial assistance system, and to prevent, correct, and hold accountable miscarriages of justice, and to strengthen supervision so as to strengthen judicial safeguards. Second, judicial openness and transparency. Ensure fairness and enhance credibility is our objective in reform. We pursue fairness through openness in trial, prosecution, police, and prison affairs, and disclose disclose many documents on law enforcement, including the judicial basis, etc. Just now, our head of delegation has mentioned we have set up the largest online judgment database, making public 54 million legal documents. We, on the third point, the so-called ambiguity in definition of national security. Our national security law has very clear definition, and including on the subjective, objective elements and penalties related to crimes endangering national security. China's counter-espionage law, regulation on religious affairs also have clear provision, and also on the criminal responsibilities. And thank you. I noticed that Austria, Belgium, and Brazil and other countries mentioned the death penalty. Whether to retain or abolish the death penalty is still quite a controversial issue. But China retains death penalty with strict control and cautious application. The 2011 and 2015 two amendments removed 22 charges carrying death penalty. The Supreme People's Court since 2007, in reviewing and approval death sentence cases through judicial interpretation, guiding comments, ensure the unified standards in the applicability of a death penalty. And as to the death penalty data, according to the Chinese law, prison sentence of over 5 years, life sentences, and capital punishment sentences are serious criminal offenses. And we have every year march to the National People's Congress relevant figures. I noticed that Bolivia, Vietnam, Saudi Arabia would like us, and other countries would like us to share China's experience in social protection and employment of ethnic minorities. We have basically three types of experience. One is to proceed with our national situation with the basic pension system combining social pooling and individual accounts, and the basic healthcare system forming the largest social protection system. And secondly, with the improvement of livelihood during development and on par with economic development. And three is to step-by-step reform, pacing the reform, taking into account the capacity of all stakeholders. And we have also improved the pension system. As to the employment of ethnic minorities, our laws requires appropriate preferences to ethnic minorities and implement a priority strategy and positive employment policies. For example, the development of labor and employment service platform in ethnic areas, capacity building, paired up assistance between eastern and western regions. And in 2017, registered urban and unemployment rate reached 3.9%, while the 8 ethnic regions and provinces are lower this rate. Thank you. I would like to thank Bahrain, Burundi, and Congo, who wish us to share our experience in poverty alleviation through education and bilingual education in ethnic areas. First, we implement targeted poverty alleviation through education. We have the database of poor students. We, secondly, have increased national budget, have improved the facilities in 220,000 rural primary and secondary schools. 3 is to improve the schooling conditions with nutrition improvement benefiting 37 million students without leaving any poor student behind. 4 is endogenous capacity, using universities to make knowledge and technical training. The Chinese government pays high attention to bilingual education, the central budget earmarked funding, allocate yearly 200 million to training of teachers, buying books and materials, and we also develop bilingual teaching materials, and we also improved school conditions to raise the standard and quality. Thank you. Some countries mentioned sexual orientation issue. China protects the right of LGBT groups by providing for their right for health. Free will transgender operation is allowed. We respect their privacy, household, family. According to our marriage law, China only recognizes marriage between a man and a woman. Same-sex marriage is not recognized, which is not discrimination against LGBTs, but rather results from our historical cultural reasons. As to transplants of organs, we have very strict provisions. Since 2015, we have made a successful transformation, and organ transplants all come from voluntary donation after death of citizens or living organs donations among relatives. There is no transplants from executed prisoners. We have also an organ allocation and information sharing system, and with traceability, which has been fully acknowledged by the WHO and other international organizations. Ecuador and Equatorial Guinea have mentioned environmental protection.
Environmental protection is one of China's basic state policies and has been upgraded to the level of ecological conservation. Today, China has remarkable achievements in economic and social development, but also suffers from the pain in breathing. Subsistence is important, so is the environment and the ecology. Chinese government puts forward the idea of harmony between humanity and nature, and lucid waters and large mountains are invaluable assets. We use the most stringent system to protect environment and seek ecological progress. Will further accelerate the transformation of economic development pattern, firmly abandon the pattern that undermines or damages the environment and refuses to seek short-term or partial economic growth at the expense of the environment. We will continue the development path of growing production, well-off life and good ecology to build a beautiful China and a beautiful world. Thank you. I thank Bolivia, Algeria and other countries for the attention to China's efforts to improve housing conditions. China highly values the housing issue and makes efforts to achieve the goal of housing for all. One, we stick to the principle that houses are for residents, not for speculations, and we establish a housing system of multi-supply, multi-guarantee and mix of renting and purchasing. Two, we improve the housing protection system through the public rental houses, low-rent houses and housing subsidies. The government ensures the basic housing needs of low-income households. Three, we consider the local situations and strengthen the control of real estate market. Four, we promote the renovation of shanty towns. Five, we establish a system of housing reserve funds. Six, we promote the renovation of the dilapidated housing in rural areas. Thank you. Cuba, Egypt and other delegates in the statements mentioned reduction of poverty. Now I would like to give the floor to the head of delegates to add some remarks in this regard. Based on my opening statement, I would like to share more information on our progress and our practices in poverty reduction. One, in China, it's necessary to put development first, use proper theory to guide development and promote and protect human rights in development. Two, it's imperative to be people-centered, to prioritize poverty reduction, education, healthcare, and other issues related to people's fundamental interests, and to maintain the social fairness and justice. 3, when developing national plan, a coordination mechanism should be in place to arrange all work comprehensively and to promote progress. 4, we also foster a peaceful and stable environment conducive to development and follow the development path in accordance with our own situation. Regarding some concrete practices, China is willing to discuss with interested countries bilaterally. And while achieving our own development, China is also ready to make due contributions to other countries' development. Thank you. Mr. President, these are the response in this round, and in the next 2 rounds we will continue to respond to other questions put forward by the delegates. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these responses, and we'll now continue with our interactive dialogue. Next on my list is Fiji.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fiji welcomes the delegation of China and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. Fiji congratulates China for its leadership in providing financial and technical assistance to developing countries, especially SIDS and LDCs, through South-South cooperation. Fiji recommends that China continue to promote South-South cooperation in responding to climate change. Fiji also recommends that China continue to take into account the vulnerabilities, needs, and views of women, children, and persons with disabilities in developing policies, projects, or programs on issues related to climate change, environmental protection, and disaster risk management. Fiji congratulates China on its progress and achievements of its Paris Agreement commitments and recommends that China continue to fully implement the Paris Agreement. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Fiji. Finland.
Mr. President, Finland thanks China for the national report and makes the following recommendations. Finland recommends that China protects and promotes all human rights, especially rights of ethnic and religious minorities, including Xinjiang Uyghurs. All the government's policies and activities, such as ethnic profiling, not in compliance with China's international human rights obligations, should be discontinued, and the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief be allowed to visit the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. Secondly, noting the increasingly severe impediments for lawyers to carry out their professional activities in China, Finland recommends China to guarantee the protection of lawyers against any form of harassment, violence, or attempts to impede or interfere with the defense of the clients in accordance with the international law. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. France recommends to China that it implement all recommendations for the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination of August 2018 on Xinjiang, in particular put an end to mass internments in camps and to invite the OHCHR and special procedures. We also recommend guaranteeing freedom of religion and belief, including in Tibet and Xinjiang, guarantee freedom of expression, assembly and association, including in Hong Kong, and to remove obstacles to freedom of information on the Internet, in particular for human rights defenders. Abolish the death penalty as soon as possible, publish statistics on the number of executions and guarantee the right to defence, outlaw all forms of discrimination and violence against LGBTI persons, and to sign the Convention on the Protection of All Persons from Forced Disappearance. Thank you.
Thank you, France. We continue with Gabon.
Thank you, President. The delegation of Gabon, which is a warm welcome to the delegation of China. We thank them for the presentation of the national report. In a constructive frame of mind, Gabon recommends to China as follows. 1. Step up national capacities to pursue measures taken in the judiciary sphere. 2. Continue promoting knowledge sharing with other developing countries on public health service projects. 3. Continue promoting in a balanced fashion the development of physical and mental health of children, while noting with satisfaction significant progress achieved by China in implementing Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. Gabon wishes every success to China in this review. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor goes to Georgia.
Thank you. Georgia warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republics of China and thanks them for the report. We welcome China's active participation in reviews of its reports by the treaty bodies since the UPR second cycle and note with satisfaction that the government has responded positively vis-à-vis establishment of the Comprehensive National Plan for the Development of Human Rights. Georgia would like to recommend to China, first, to further advance the preparation for the ratification of International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and second, to continue its path towards establishing of a national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris Principles. With this, Georgia wishes the delegation of China a very successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Georgia. And the floor goes to Germany.
Germany welcomes China's stated commitment to international cooperation in the Human Rights Council and recognizes China's progress in the fight against poverty. Germany recommends 1. End all unlawful detention, including unconstitutional mass detention of Uyghurs and other Muslims in Xinjiang and residential surveillance at a designated location. 2. Respect the rights of freedom of religion and belief, opinion and expression, peaceful assembly and culture, also for Tibetans, Uyghurs and other minorities. 3. Guarantee fair trials, allow all defendants unhindered access to chosen lawyers, prompt notification of families and transparent legal procedures. 4. Allow independent observers, including special procedures, unhindered access to all regions. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Excellency. Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ghana welcomes the Chinese delegation to the third UPR cycle. You have the following 2 recommendations. 1. Continue to strengthen the social insurance system. And 2. Step up efforts to further reduce poverty among the rural population. My delegation commends China on the progress made in promoting the economic, social and cultural rights of its people. We note in particular the poverty alleviation and reduction intervention programs that have so far lifted some 7 million Chinese citizens out of poverty, 68 million of which was achieved in the past 5 years. We laud China's social intervention initiatives targeted at women, children, persons with disabilities, the elderly and people in ethnic minorities, and urge the government to continue to make progress in this area. I thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greece welcomes the delegation of China in this UPR cycle, notices the evolution in numerous areas of social and political rights, and invites China to continue its work towards eliminating poverty by 2020. Furthermore, we positively note the publication of the third National Human Rights Action Plan, and we take notice of the 2015 reduction of the number of offences for which death penalty may be imposed. We would like to submit the following 3 recommendations. First, to continue advancing administrative and judicial reforms in preparation for the ratification of the ICCPR. Second, to consider further measures to ensure a safe environment for journalists and other civil society actors to carry out their work. Third, to further strengthen the protection of the rights of ethnic minority groups in accordance with China's constitution and international human rights commitments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Guinea, you have the floor.
Republic of Guinea welcomes the Chinese delegation. We thank them for their national report as part of the third cycle. My delegation recommends to China that it continues sharing with other developing countries the best practices when it comes to poverty reduction. My delegation recommends also to China that it continues reforms with a view to protecting human rights as a whole. 3, we recommend to China that it continues structural reforms on issues of sustainable development. In conclusion, the Republic of Guinea notes with satisfaction the implementation of recommendations stemming from the second cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Guinea-Bissau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Guinea-Bissau welcomes Chinese delegation and applauds its reports. Guinea-Bissau would like to encourage China to continue the preservation of life, of value that uphold respect for life and human rights, to continue its great work to reduce poverty, to continue to share experience and good practices in social and economic development with other countries, to continue its efforts to protect the environment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We continue with Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the government of Guyana, I would like to warmly welcome the Chinese delegation to Geneva and to thank them for their report and their constructive participation in this very important UPR process that seeks to advance human rights in all countries. We acknowledge China's long-standing commitment to the principles of cooperation, and we take this opportunity to commend the considerable efforts made by China towards the strengthening of its national human rights mechanisms. We recommend that China considers the results of this UPR cycle as it did the recommendations emanating from the last UPR cycle. We recommend that China continues and expands its training on human rights of awareness for government officials to all segments of society. We recommend that China continues and expands the current efforts at tackling all forms of gender discrimination, including current efforts at integration of women's development through its overall national economic and social plan.
Thank you. Guyana, Haiti.
Thank you, sir. We would like to welcome the high-level Chinese delegation, and we welcome China's efforts to pursue its development, which has drawn millions out of poverty. We have two recommendations. Firstly, follow up on the relevant recommendations accepted under the second cycle on freedom of religion, and in keeping with the Chinese constitution, to ensure greater religious freedoms for Catholics and Protestants. Secondly, pursue relevant recommendations under the previous UPR cycle for a national framework for the evaluation of human rights and the environmental impact of companies in China in order to promote.
Dominican Republic.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. We'd like to welcome the distinguished delegation of China and thank them for the presentation of their report. We appreciate China's implemented a law and guarantees of public cultural services to satisfy cultural needs of the population. Dominican Republic respects as follows. 1. Continue consolidating progress achieved in promotion of the rights and well-being of women. Continue promoting right to education of the children of migrant workers. And accelerate process of modification of the law relating to continue improving the legal protection of minors and adolescents. We wish China every success. Thank you.
Thank you. Hungary.
Mr. President, we commend the progress made in the field of poverty elimination and encourages the government of China to continue improving the living standards of the people. We appreciate the efforts to protect the rights of vulnerable groups. However, we remain deeply concerned about the reported human rights violations against ethnic and religious minorities. Hungary recommends the following: allow independent observers unhindered access to all parts of China's territory, ratify and implement the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and ensure that its protection are extended to all minorities. Continue to protect the rights of vulnerable groups. Finally, we wish a successful UPR to the delegation of China. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Hungary. Iceland is next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Iceland welcomes the delegation of China. We appreciate and applaud the efforts of China to ensure that more citizens can enjoy a decent standard of living for the fulfillment of the human rights. We note that development and respect for human rights are interdependent and mutually reinforcing. We take this opportunity to express our concerns over reports related to the Uyghur population of Xinjiang. We call on China to cooperate fully with the relevant UN bodies in this regard. Iceland makes the following recommendations. First, to ratify the ICCPR. Second, end arbitrary detention of those who defend and promote human rights. Third, to adopt concrete measures to promote women's full and equal participation in political and public life. Fourth, to establish a moratorium on executions. I wish China all success for its review. I thank you.
Thank you, Iceland. I pass the floor to India.
Mr. President, India welcomes the delegation of China. India commends the progress made by China in advancing the recommendations received in its second UPR, particularly in bringing socio-economic development. India's full statement is on the UPR extranet. India recommends the following: to ensure well-being of all its people based on inclusive development, to continue taking measures for improving women's development, including participation of women in public affairs, to continue measures to improve the social security system for all, to continue its study on the issue of establishing a national human rights institution in accordance with Paris principles. We wish China all success. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. Indonesia is next on our list.
President, Indonesia welcome and thanks the delegation of China for the presentation of their national report and commend China's strategic approach to ensure the overall national development and well-being of its population. Indonesia would like to recommend China the following: continue to increase government investment in maternal and child health services. Continue to strengthen the development of laws and systems for protecting freedom of religious and beliefs. And encourage China, including Hong Kong and Macau Special Administrative Region, to consider ratifying ACRMW. We wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Next speaker is Iran.
President, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran welcomes the delegation of China headed by Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and thank them for presentation of its national reports. We wish to make the three recommendations to China. 1, to safeguard the political system and development path chosen by its own people. 2, continue its effort to eliminate absolute poverty by 2020 and share best practice of poverty alleviation with other countries. 3, continue to raise up the level, the quality of the coverage of its public service and further improve its, particularly in the rural area. We also commend the drafting and implementing of the second National Plan of Action by China 2012 and 2015 and also issued its National Human Rights Action Plan, which identified the goals and the task of the respecting, protecting and promoting human rights for 2016 and 2015 period. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Iran. Comoros.
Delegation of Comoros welcomes the delegation of China. We congratulate them for the high quality of the national report on human rights, which has seen consistent, significant progress. We in particular appreciate the major efforts made to promote the right to health for all in China, but also in other countries like my own through training programs and the establishment of sanitary infrastructure. In conclusion, we'd like to make the following recommendation: encourage China to pursue and further bolster its action in the field of education and training of the vulnerable, demarginalized groups.
Thank you, Comoros. Ireland.
Acknowledges the significant progress that China has made to improve the economic and social situation of its citizens. Ireland is concerned at reports of the treatment of ethnic Uyghurs, in particular their detention in political re-education camps. We urge China to respect freedom of religion and belief and recommend that China grant access to the OHCHR to all regions of the country, including the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. We remain concerned about the treatment of human rights defenders and lawyers in China and recommend that China take immediate action to allow them to exercise their right to freedom of expression and opinion without threats, harassment or repercussions. Ireland continues to urge China, including Hong Kong and Macau, to establish a comprehensive anti-discrimination law to protect all marginalized groups, including LGBTI persons. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite Italy to take the floor.
We welcome the delegation of China and appreciate China's commitment to the UPR. Italy recommends China to reduce the offences punishable by death penalty and provide official figures regarding death sentences and executions, considering to introduce a moratorium on death penalty. Prevent and combat all forms of discrimination and violence, especially against ethnic and religious minorities. Guarantee freedom of opinion and expression, enhancing efforts to create an environment in which journalists, human rights defenders and NGOs can freely operate according to international standards. Intensify efforts to promote and fully ensure the rights of women, children and persons with disabilities. Italy wishes China a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. Japan is next.
Appreciates the long-term improvement on economic, social rights and development throughout China. Japan is concerned about recent tendency toward clampdown on human rights defenders, intellectuals and others. We expect China to take additional actions to protect freedom of expression, including the press and communication, personal liberty and freedom of religion, including for Islamic, Buddhist and Christian faith. Japan is concerned about human rights situation of minorities, including Uyghurs and Tibetans. We encourage China to take further steps to guarantee human rights and freedoms of its minorities. Japan recommends early ratification of ICCPR and ICPPED, and further efforts to promote all human rights, including minorities, cultural rights, personal liberty and freedom of religion.
Jordan is next.
Welcomes the Chinese delegation and fully recognizes that the Chinese government has actively implemented recommendations of its second UPR. We thank them for the report and presentation, and in this context we recommend the following: continue public health education consultation for the general public and support NGOs in providing health services in communities, continue to strengthen social correction management and help address the problems of employment, schooling, social insurance for persons under social correction in the community, and ensure that the disabled enjoy the equal rights to participate in national social affairs, management, and other legitimate rights and interests. Finally, Jordan appreciates the progress and positive developmental results achieved thus far in China. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Kazakhstan, you have the floor.
Kazakhstan welcomes the delegation of China and appreciates the significant progress achieved in such areas as poverty reduction, health and education. We also acknowledge China's efforts in steadily expanding development assistance to other countries through South-South cooperation. 1.6 million ethnic Kazakhs currently live in China. They constitute a bridge of friendship between the two countries and play a major role in strengthening our strategic partnership. In recent years, the Chinese authorities have been carrying out a counter-terrorist campaign with a view of ensuring political stability and public order. Kazakhstan understands the sensitivity of this issue and is making use of the diplomatic toolbox through working contacts between the two foreign ministries to address the issues.
Kenya.
Mr. President, Kenya warmly welcomes the delegation of China and congratulates China for the report. We commend China for the positive progress achieved so far and the various steps taken to implement human rights, especially our extensive achievements in implementing the right to development in and outside China. In that spirit, we recommend to China to ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and 2, continue extending Chinese laws, regulations and standards such as the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights to Chinese companies operating beyond China's borders. Kenya wishes China the best in the current UPR process. I thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. Kuwait, the floor is yours.
Welcomes the delegation of China and would like to thank it on presenting the national report. We commend the great efforts taken by China since the last UPR, and we would like to that extent recommend the following: strengthen law enforcement, education and supervision to judicial personnel to continue to implement the revised law on the protection of minors and the law on the prevention of juvenile delinquency to ensure minors' physical and psychological health, promote the healthy development of children in poverty-stricken areas, and prevent the intergenerational transmission of poverty. Kuwait wishes China success in its review. I thank you.
Thank you, Kuwait. We continue with Kyrgyzstan.
The Kyrgyz delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China. We are pleased to note that since the adoption of its second UPR, China has made progress in follow-up of the UPR's outcome, in particular in strengthening the national legislative and institutional frameworks. Given this, we'd like to recommend to the People's Republic of China the following: to ensure the effective implementation of the Third National Human Rights Action Plan, to sign and ratify the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and members of their families, to continue to promote openness of judicial system and fully use the four major platforms for the openness of approval process, trial procedure, judgment documents and execution information. Mr. President, my delegation wishes success to the Chinese authorities in the promotion and protection of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Lao PDR warmly congratulates the People's Republic of China for the comprehensive report on the progress of human rights development with Chinese characteristics. Laos had 3 recommendations. First, continue to communicate with other developing countries on the experience of state governance, including promoting and protecting human rights. Second, continue to guarantee the rights of ethnic minority to participate in the management of the state and social affairs on equal footing according to the law. Third, continue to carry out the new development concept and build a modern economic system. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Latvia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Latvia welcomes the delegation of China and thanks for the report. Latvia would like to reiterate following recommendations from the previous cycle: to continue national reforms with an aim to ratify ICCPR, explore options to accede to the Rome Statutes of the International Criminal Court, and to respond positively to pending visit requests by the special procedure mandate holders of the Human Rights Council, and to consider the extension of the standing invitation to all special procedure mandate holders. Latvia wishes to the government of China success in this review. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Latvia. Lebanon is next on our list.
سيد الرئيس يرحب وفد لبنان بوفد دولة.
Thank you, sir. My delegation would like to welcome the friendly delegation from China. We thank China for the presentation of its report, and we take note of the report, in particular significant progress in the area of socio-economic and cultural rights, thanks to efforts in the area of development over decades, despite huge challenges. May we underscore that the Chinese approach is a fruitful one, and we would like to make the following recommendations to ensure developing countries can enjoy the expertise of China in terms of development, and to provide appropriate interest to the most vulnerable sectors of society.
The floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lesotho only wishes to the delegation of China and thanks them for the comprehensive presentation of the report. We commend China for lifting millions of its people out of poverty and thus fulfilling the economic and social cultural rights, including the right to food, adequate housing, education, health, and social security. Mr. President, in spite of achievements elucidated above, Lesotho knows that China still faces some obstacles in the human rights fields and therefore recommends that China should accelerate human rights education for all to build a fair and just society where human rights are fully respected. Lesotho finally wishes China a successful UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Lesotho. Libya is next.
President, we would like to welcome the Chinese delegation, whom we thank for their report. We take note of the report presented by the People's Republic of China, and we welcome the acceptance of a large number of recommendations. We'd like to make the following recommendations. Support the country in its capacity building in the area of sustainable development and improve the standard of living of the citizens and protect the environment, ensuring appropriate conditions. Secondly, bolster education reform and pay particular attention to developing countries as part of South-South cooperation. We wish China every success. Thank you.
Thank you, Libya. Liechtenstein, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Liechtenstein welcomes the delegation of China and thanks for the report. We recommend that China ensure that human rights defenders can exercise their work without being subject to harassment, intimidation, or any kind of reprisals, and that China establish an NHRA in accordance with the Paris Principle. We recommend that China takes adequate measures to prevent women from all forms of gender-based discrimination and violence, and that China ratify the optional protocol to CEDAW. We recommend that China establish a moratorium on the execution of the death penalty with a view to its complete abolishment, to commute all existing death sentences and ratify the ICCPR. Finally, we recommend that China ratify the Rome Statute of the ICC and the Kampala amendments to the statute. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Luxembourg, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
President, we would like to welcome the Chinese delegation and thank the delegation for presenting its third national report. We would like to make the following recommendations. That China ratify and implement the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That China protect and guarantee the respect of freedom of information and expression, in particular for journalists, bloggers, and human rights defenders. Thirdly, that China reinforce cooperation with the OHCHR and with special procedures. And fourthly, that China look into a moratorium on capital punishment, moving towards its total abolition. We wish China every success in the implementation of the recommendations under the current UPR cycle. Thank you.
The floor goes to Madagascar.
Thank you. We welcome the Chinese delegation and note action taken by the country. We would like to encourage the country to pursue this dynamic and have the following recommendations: that the country should continue to provide basic healthcare for migrants and implement the Charter and the Convention for people with disabilities and other relevant instruments, and implement the Sustainable Development Program looking forward to 2030. We wish China every success. Thank you.
Thank you. Malaysia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Malaysia warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China, and we thank them for the presentation of their report. Malaysia commends China for its many achievements in human rights. China's economic success has certainly resulted in great improvements in the well-being of many segments of its population. Notably, poverty eradication, advancement of women through education and employment continue to achieve commendable progress. We further laud China's commitment to promoting entrepreneurship and employment. In the spirit of constructive engagement and cooperation, Malaysia would like to offer the following 2 recommendations. 1. Enhance cooperation and sharing of best practices with other developing countries to guarantee the rights of persons with disabilities by reducing poverty, rehabilitation, and access to education. And 2. Continue efforts to curtail gender discrimination. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. We continue with Mali. Mali? Absent? Malta?
Thank you, Mr. President. Malta welcomes the delegation of China and thanks it for presenting its national reports. Malta welcomes China's signature of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as the steps it is taking to advance administrative and judicial reforms in preparation for its ratification. In this regard, Malta would like to make the following recommendation. Continue taking steps towards an early ratification of the ICCPR. We wish the delegation of China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Malta. Mauritania, I invite you to take the floor.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. يرحب وفد بلادي بحضرة
President, this delegation would like warmly to welcome the delegation of the People's Republic of China, led by the Deputy Foreign Minister. We welcome China's report under the UPR. Mauritania welcomes the renewed commitment of the Chinese authorities in the area of the promotion and protection of human rights. We also welcome developments in the area of education, healthcare, and other rights. May I conclude by wishing the People's Republic of China every success in efforts to protect and promote human rights. Thank you.
Mauritius.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Mauritius delegation thanks His Excellency Mr. Yucheng, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, for presenting his country's report, and we welcome his delegation. Over the past few years, the People's Republic of China has achieved great socio-economic development and lifted millions out of poverty. We commend the government to have in parallel taken initiatives for the promotion and protection of human rights, such as administrative and judicial reforms, human rights education, and enactment of various legislation. We are confident that the country will continue on this commendable path and sustain its efforts toward an inclusive and equitable growth in line with Agenda 2030. The delegation recommends the further strengthening of the rights of vulnerable groups such as women, children, the elderly, and the disabled.
Mexico. I pass you the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, sir. We note progress achieved in China since the previous cycle in terms of reduction of poverty and ensuring better access to healthcare and the adoption of the law against domestic violence. We would like to recommend the ratification of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Secondly, the adoption of measures to ensure that all children, especially asylum seekers and refugees, have access to education. And thirdly, the adoption of measures, public policy measures and laws to ensure the exercise of the right of everybody not to be discriminated against, irrespective of, for instance, sexual, religious or ethnic origin. Thank you.
Montenegro, the floor goes to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Montenegro welcomes the distinguished delegation of People's Republic of China and thanks for the presentation of its national report. We welcome the efforts undertaken by the government in improving human rights situation on the ground, in particular achieving significant reduction in maternal and child mortality. We welcome the adoption of several key human rights documents, including National Human Rights Action Plan 2016-2020. Montenegro recommends first to ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, second to explicitly prohibit by law corporal punishment in all settings. We wish to friendly China every success in current UPR cycle. I thank you.
Thank you, Montenegro. Morocco, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Morocco warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of China and thanks it for the comprehensive national report and its presentation today. We appreciate the cooperation between the government of China and the human rights treaty bodies and special mandate holders of the Human Rights Council. We highly appraise that China's education scale ranks the first in the world. Morocco recommends that China continue introducing and implementing measures to reduce the gender pay gap and strengthen the representation of women in leadership and managerial positions. We also recommend that China continue to improve the quality of maternity services. Morocco wishes to the delegation of China a very successful review during this cycle. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I invite Mozambique to take the floor.
Mr. President, we wish to warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of the People's Republic of China and thank them for the presentation of their country reports. Mozambique has the following recommendation to offer to China. Continue to improve the quality of universal internet access services and bridge the digital divide. Continue to guarantee the right to work and build harmonious labor relations. Give more public health resources to the central and western region and rural areas. We wish China a successful review. We thank you.
Thank you, Mozambique. Myanmar.
Mr. President, Myanmar recommends China firstly to continue its effort to lift rural population living under the current poverty line out of poverty by 2020. Secondly, to continue to implement Child Development Guideline and National Program of Action for Child Development and improve the mechanism for the protection of children's rights and interests. Thirdly, to continue to implement rural revival strategy. Myanmar highly commend China for its firm commitment to the basic principle of the international law with the UN Charters as a core and its honest fulfillment of the obligation under the International Human Rights Convention. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Namibia is next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Namibia warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China to this third cycle of the UPR and thank them for the report presented today. We kindly recommend the following to China. One, to continue sharing its experience and best practices in implementing people's right to development. Two, to continue identifying more crimes for which the death penalty should be abolished. Three, to continue taking steps in preparation for the ratification of the ICCPR. We applaud China for its efforts to promote a new type of international relations based on mutual respect and benefit, and we wish the delegation of China a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Namibia. Nepal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nepal welcomes the delegation of China and appreciates the presentation of the report. China has been accelerating comprehensive development, creating a robust base for wider realization and promotion of human rights. A remarkable economic and social development has been achieved in the Tibet Autonomous Region, which adjoins Nepal. Nepal recommends the following. Continue to implement the free education policy in Tibet Autonomous Region, increase support for early childhood education in the rural communities, continue to protect the rights of migrant workers through legislation. We wish China every success in their UPR process. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. I invite Netherlands to take the floor.
Mr. President, the Netherlands welcomes the Chinese delegation. We commend China for the advancement of economic and social rights. However, we are concerned about the protection of civil and political rights, including the respect for freedom of religion or belief. The Netherlands recommends, first, to cooperate with and provide access to relevant UN bodies in order to help ensure that its policies in Xinjiang, particularly regarding the so-called vocational education and training centers, are in line with international human rights standards. Second, to adopt within 1 year legislation prohibiting discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity in all public and private sectors, and to provide positive duties on the part of government to promote equality on these grounds. The Netherlands also recommends...
New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. President. New Zealand commends China's acceptance of its 2013 recommendation to move towards ratification of the ICCPR. New Zealand requests an update on ratification and recommends that China continues to work towards ratification by the earliest possible date. New Zealand recommends China respect, protect and fulfil the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion in accordance with General Comment 22 of the HRC. To this end, New Zealand recommends that China resume the two-way dialogue on Tibet. New Zealand recommends that China implement the recommendations of the latest third report on China, including responding to concerns about detention of individuals who have not been lawfully charged, tried and convicted for a criminal offence. Finally, New Zealand commends China on reducing the number of crimes punishable by death. We recommend that China continues to reform towards abolition of the death penalty. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Niger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. We would like warmly to welcome the Chinese delegation and congratulate the delegation on presenting its national report under the third UPR cycle. We would like to recommend that China look into the ratification of the International Convention on the Protection of Migrant Workers and set up a national institution pursuant to the Paris Principles. We welcome progress achieved by China in the area of human rights since the previous cycle. The country has a population of 1.3 billion and 700 million have climbed out of poverty, and jobs have been provided for 770 million in the last 5 years. We welcome the judicial reforms undertaken by China since 2014. Thank you.
Nigeria.
President, Nigeria welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China to the presentation of their third cycle UPR national report. We commend China for its continued cooperation with human rights mechanisms and its efforts in implementing the previous recommendations, as well as make the following recommendations to China. 1, to continue to share its experiences in the realization of the right to development with African countries in the context of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. 2, sustain its efforts in the global fight against terrorism and extremism, to keep improving its legal system for the protection of human rights and effectively improve judicial guarantees for human rights, and continue to raise human rights awareness among members of the society. Finally, we note with encouragement the progress made by China in respect of the socio-economic development of its people.
Thank you, Nigeria. Norway is next on our list.
President, Norway welcomes China's active participation in the UPR and notes the positive steps taken since its last review, including poverty reduction and progress in the implementation of Agenda 2030. Norway remains concerned about certain human rights issues in China. Measures to counter terrorism and prevent radicalization and violent extremism must be human rights compliant. Norway recommends 1, full transparency on the situation for religious minorities in Xinjiang, including by allowing UN-mandated observers unrestricted access to places of interment in the region. 2, to create and maintain a safe and enabling environment for all human rights defenders. 3, to take steps towards abolishing the death penalty. 4, to respect, protect and ensure the freedom of expression of all citizens. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The floor goes to Oman.
I would like to welcome the delegation of the People's Republic of China. We have read the report carefully and we welcome the attachment of China to development and respect for human rights with Chinese characteristics. We would like to make the following recommendations. Continue efforts to close the gap between rural and urban areas, to strengthen social security system, and hope that we will be able to be involved with this good experiment and to move forward with the development of the educational system. Thank you.
Thank you, Oman.
شكرا لعمان.
Now I'll pass the floor to His Excellency Mr. Zhang Yun.
والآن أعطي الكلمة إلى سيد جانغ يونغ نائب رئيس الوفد لكي يرد على الأسئلة المطروحة في هذا الجزء الثاني من الحوار.
Thank you, Mr. President.
شكرا.
Mr. President, just now various delegates in their statements recognized the achievements in poverty reduction and economic, social, cultural rights, achievements in this field and progress achieved. The Chinese delegation once again is grateful to these recognition and these commendation. In the statement of some delegates, some issues, obviously there are some misunderstanding. We would like to, in our dialogue and response, to make clarifications as regard to some statements and remarks are not based on facts. Therefore, they are full of some prejudice. We are very regretful. First of all, I'd like to say Fiji, Bangladesh, and some delegations touch upon climate change. China, as a responsible major country, has taken proactive action to tackle climate change. Significant progress have been made. China will continue to make effort and cooperate with international community, strengthen cooperation on the principle of combat differential responsibilities and respect capabilities to implement Paris Agreement, promote global efforts towards green, low-carbon, sustainable development path. This development was regard. We noted that the French delegate did not mention this matter. Probably he forgot it or what. But we will further continue to commit to the Paris Agreement, safeguard multilateralism, and the core role of the UN. Some delegates in their statements touch upon strengthening of the South-South cooperation. We are in complete agreement. We agree that our country is supporting South-South cooperation through China-Africa cooperation, China-Latin America cooperation, various forms, and promoting and deepening South-South cooperation. We have set up a UN Peace and Development Foundation, South-South Cooperation Foundation, to support developing countries engage in the South-South cooperation provide facility. India, Bulgaria, and some other delegates mentioned about setting up national human rights institutions. China is yet to set up such institutions in accordance with Paris principles. However, similar institutions, the functions are carried out by relevant government departments, National People's Congress Standing Committee, and various departments have their office receiving complaint proposals to deal with various complaints and letters, petitions, and their supervision or supervising organs monitoring the behavior of officials, and their organs to promote the rights of people of minorities. As for national human rights institutions, we will continue to work on it and make study of it. Some delegates in their statements mentioned about the realization of 2030 agenda. I'm proud to say, in respect, China is well advanced in the ranks of the world. We have corresponding national mechanism in implementing this agenda and incorporated in our national planning program. And out of the 17 major goals, China, in many of these goals, in the field of these goals, we have achieved remarkable success, especially in poverty reduction. We have completed tasks ahead of schedule. Now, I would like to invite the members of my delegation to respond from the Ministry of Justice, Public Security, and Religious Affairs Bureau about the lawyers' rights, NGO, and religious belief, these issues to make response.
I've noted that Finland, Ireland, and other countries mentioned the right of lawyers. In China, the protection of lawyers' right to practice law is a key measure to achieve comprehensive rule of law. In legislation and in the practices will constantly improve the system and mechanisms to effectively protect lawyers' rights. Meanwhile, being a lawyer is not the amulet to criminals and cannot turn them into persons out of the law. The lawyers who violate the law will be punished by the law everywhere around the world. And as a country of rule of law, China is no exception. To hold accountable the lawyers violating the law itself is the requirement of rule of law. This is not the so-called repression of the so-called rights defense lawyers. By contrast, this is to protect the interest of the majority of the lawyers who practice in line with the law, to foster enabling professional environment, and to promote the healthy development of this profession. I would like to respond to two questions. One, Ireland, Germany mentioned the torture, extended detention, arbitrary detention, and forced disappearance. China's constitution, the criminal procedure law, and other laws explicitly prohibit torture, prohibit exacting confession by torture, and stipulate audiovisual recording throughout the whole process when interrogating suspects. All these have formed a strict legal system against torture. In law enforcement, all acts of violating the legitimate rights of suspects or detainees or acts of torture are strictly held accountable. Meanwhile, we are now working hard to promote the reform towards a trial-centered proceeding system to effectively implement no penalty without the law, no punishment in doubtful cases, and to seek just ruling via just procedures. As for the extended detention, arbitrary detention, and forced disappearance mentioned by the countries, in bilateral discussions, China has provided the policy, legal, and technical evidence to clarify the truth, and we sincerely hope relevant countries will stop politicizing these issues. Two, Italy and other countries mentioned the activities of the overseas NGOs in China. China welcomes and supports the overseas NGOs' exchange and cooperation activities in China in line with the law. Since the law on administration of the overseas NGOs came into force on January 1st, 2017, 427 overseas NGOs have registered through their representatives or agencies in China, and 1,179 activities have been filed. We will continue to protect these NGOs' lawful activities in China in line with the law, and will provide necessary services and facilitations. Thank you.
Some countries, in advanced questions, they allege that China suppresses religious freedom. Just now, Austria, and some countries also mentioned this issue. China protects religious belief according to law. There is sound legal basis and freedom for this. Constitution, criminal law, ethnic, regional autonomy law provide for freedom of citizens to believe in or not believe in religion. The reality is dynamic and diverse, with various religions developing normally and healthily, with nearly 200 million religious beliefs and 380,000 clergy population. About the closing or demolition of churches, one case in point is about the redevelopment project in Zhejiang province. Such work is based on the regulation on illegal buildings and other laws, regulations, as well as the building codes and rules. It is not targeting specific religions or religious sites. Of all the demolition in 2014 of legal buildings, only 0.26% regard religious buildings. Another case is the so-called Wumi Institute of Buddhism. The institute is expanding its operation illegally. At its peak, its admissions of monks and nuns more than 10,000, way above the fixed standard, breaking the relevant rules. And unlawful buildings in the institute is serious, with almost 10,000 wooden houses and with incidents of fire. And the local government regulates the ministers, and dismantling illegal buildings is according to law, and provide public service facilities, and cumulatively investing more than 1 billion Chinese yuan. The purpose is not to close down, but to make it legal, compliant, orderly, and safe. That has been supported by the religious community. About Falun Gong, it is not religion, but an evil sect, and is banned by Chinese law. Thank you. Mr. President, just now some delegations mentioned Hong Kong and Macau. So I'd like to ask the delegates from Hong Kong and Macau to make remarks statement. They are also the deputy heads of delegation of Chinese delegations.
Protected by the basic law, Hong Kong Bills of Rights Ordinance and other laws. The rule of law, an independent judiciary, and freedom of speech are amongst Hong Kong's core values. Recent concerns over some aspects of our human rights situation are unwarranted, unfounded, and unsubstantiated. They arise from misconception and a lack of an understanding of a real situation. Let me explain. Under one country, two systems, Hong Kong enjoys a high degree of autonomy. Fundamental rights and freedoms are all guaranteed by the Basic Law. We are firmly committed to protecting press freedom. We do not exercise any censorship. On the recent work visa extension case, we will not comment on any specific decision on our immigration control. All such decisions are made by our immigration authorities under the laws and prevailing policies having regard to individual circumstances of each case. Any concerns that Hong Kong's freedom of speech and of the press is under threat are totally groundless. On the contrary, we maintain an environment conducive to the operation of a free and active press. Some 80 foreign media organizations operate in Hong Kong and rigorously perform their role as a watchdog. As for the eligibility for running in the Legislative Council election, upholding the Basic Law and swearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR is a basic legal duty of a legislator. One cannot do so if one promotes Hong Kong independence or self-determination or advocates independence as an option. This runs counter to the constitutional legal status of Hong Kong SAR. Article 1 of the Basic Law stipulates that the Hong Kong SAR is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China. It is our duty to safeguard our country's sovereignty, security, and development interests. On speculation of authorities of other jurisdictions taking enforcement action in Hong Kong, our police have investigated and found no evidence in support of such claims. On the decision to ban an organization under the Society's Ordinance, as an appeal has been lodged, we will not comment further. But let me stress that Hong Kong people do enjoy freedom of association and expression, but like any other jurisdiction, such freedom is not absolute. The ICCPR provides restrictions may be imposed by law if it is necessary to protect national security or public safety, public order, or the rights and freedoms of others. This is mirrored in the Hong Kong Bill of Rights. On the misunderstanding that some protesters were targeted for exercising their civil rights, I must clarify that these protesters were convicted not because of their beliefs or their exercising civil rights, but because of their disorderly or violent conduct in breach of the law. They have crossed the line separating the lawful exercise of constitutional rights from unlawful activities subject to sanctions. I must say that the number of public meetings and processions in Hong Kong last year was 10 times over 1997, and the overwhelming majority of these activities were orderly and peaceful. This demonstrates that freedom of peaceful assembly is fully respected. On interpretation of the Basic Law, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress has the ultimate authority to do so under Article 158 of the Basic Law. This is part of a constitutional order. Our Court of Final Appeal agrees that the Standing Committee's interpretation is valid and binding on our courts. As for Article 104 related oath-taking when assuming specified public offices, the Standing Committee's interpretation simply explains clearly the meaning of that article without changing its content. Since the establishment of the Hong Kong Special Economic Region in 1997, Hong Kong has remained the world's freest economy, a vibrant international financial business center, a thriving logistics and tourist hub, as well as one of the safest cities in the world. We are committed to building a caring and fair Hong Kong, with the government investing heavily in education, medical services, welfare, infrastructure, poverty alleviation, and helping the ethnic minorities. These remarkable achievements are underpinned by our core values and unique institutional strengths which make Hong Kong tick. Hong Kong will continue to forge ahead as Asia's world city with openness, inclusiveness, and diversity under the successful, innovative, and well-tried one-country systems.
I noted that the island mentioned about the specific issues in Macau.
Although there is no standalone anti-discrimination law, but equality and non-discrimination is the cornerstone of our legal system. We have different laws that have such principles and anti-discrimination provisions, including the basic law, Macau Civil Code, Macau's Administration Procedural Code, labor law, as well as the labor relations law, and education other than higher education law, and as well as higher education law. Now, I'd like to answer questions asked by the Philippines.
The Macau SAR attach high importance to the psychological and mental physical health of children through combating crimes on drugs and to instill positive energy to the society. The public recreation park and garden is a good facility for the public. The purpose is for the public, especially the youth and the parents, to have systematic education, curriculum and training and experiences, and to promote a positive value towards life and against abuse of drugs. There are different functional rooms. There are 3 facilities about the welfare and health of the and this is internationally recognized effort against abuse of drugs. The aim is to promote the awareness of children between the age of 5 and 12 about the danger and risk of such use. The Macau SAR since 2000 has introduced such curriculum, has provided 2,000 children with such courses and seminars, and according to the level of their maturity, and so that they can actively take part in classroom activities and learning skills. And in order to further promote the effort against drugs, and the parents also play a positive role and with their participation. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to thank the delegates from Hong Kong and Macau. I'd like to ask our head of delegation to respond to the rural and the peasant question, to make brief remarks. Some delegations mentioned about the human rights defenders, and I should like to say everybody is equal before the law and should be punished by law if there is offense.
That is the human's conscious common sense and is applicable everywhere. But why in China are these normal criminal cases always labeled in different ways? And why are these criminals always be praised by some countries as good people or human rights defenders? I don't know, I'm not sure. Maybe in their eyes, for anyone, no matter whether or not they're criminals, as long as they're anti-China, against the government, and separate and undermine the country, they are human rights defenders. How can this make sense? As for freedom of expression, there is no absolute freedom, and the freedom of expression also has red lines. That is, they shall not violate law or undermine other people's rights. China has 800 million internet users, 12,000 kinds of newspapers and journals. Every day, the users receive. Every day, the users produce 30 billion pieces of information. We could say that China has the largest information production and has the most diversified and most active minds. A country like this is criticized as a country with no freedom of expression. How does it make sense? Does it mean that only the anti-government statements or the expressions that incite separatism and terrorism could be seen as freedom of expression? Some other countries also mentioned their attention to our rural people. Last year, we put forward a strategy to boost the rural areas. Our aim is to boost the production, and with this strategy, the migrant workers, the agricultural and rural workers, and issues, relevant issues will be well addressed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for your responses. And now we'll continue with our interactive dialogue. Let me turn to the list of speakers. Next on our list is Pakistan.
Pakistan welcomes the delegation of China and commends its national report. We recommend China to continue its efforts to maintain and promote peace and stability and the welfare of its people living in the ethnic minority areas, including through action against terrorist organizations and individuals. Continue to expand the scale of human rights, technical cooperation to other developing countries within the framework of South-South cooperation. Continue to promote the BRI to help other developing countries in their development endeavors. Continue to promote discussions in the HRC on the role of development in promoting and protecting of human rights. We are delighted to see that China has achieved the most rapid development in the last 30 years and has created a great miracle both in economic development and in scoring significant progress in promoting and protecting human rights. China's people-centered development approach has effectively protected the development interests and human rights of the Chinese people. We wish the government of China a successful review.
Peru.
Thank you, President. Peru welcomes the distinguished delegation of China. We recognize the significant achievements in the field of combating poverty. Peru, in a constructive spirit, recommends as follows. 1. Continue efforts to implement its international commitments in the field of human rights, especially those with regards to the rights of women and children. 2. Strengthen the prospects for respecting cultural differences within its own territory. 3. Continue streamlining the development of laws and systems that protect freedom of religion for all citizens. 4. Consider establishment of a legal framework to guarantee that activities carried out by industries should comply, subject to its jurisdiction, should not negatively impact on human rights in their activities abroad. Peru wishes China every success in its UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. Philippines.
Mr. President, the Philippines welcomes the Chinese delegation to this session. We commend China's successful anti-poverty measures and initiatives. We note efforts made to enhance access to education of children with disability. The Hong Kong Special Administrative Region is home to a lot of foreign workers. We commend actions taken to improve their welfare. In a constructive spirit, we recommend 1. Continue efforts in enhancing the welfare of persons with disability and the elderly. 2. Continue the fight against illegal drugs and rehabilitation of drug addicts. 3. Enhance monitoring of the implementation of standard employment contract, particularly for migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong. And 4. Consider becoming a party to the International Convention on the Rights of All Migrant Workers and members of their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippines. Poland, I invite you to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Poland thanks the delegation of China for the constructive participation in the UPR and an informative report. Poland notes that continued efforts of China to improve human rights situation and acknowledge the cooperation with some of the UN human rights special procedures. We commend China's achievements regarding poverty alleviation, which contribute to the improvement of living standards. Poland recommends 1. To ratify ICCPR, 2. To establish a national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris Principles, 3. To ensure full implementation of international human rights obligations regarding freedom of religion and belief, and 4. To positively respond to the invitation addressed by the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. Thank you.
Thank you. We continue with Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Portugal welcomes the delegation of China and would like to make the following recommendations. To take appropriate measures to ensure that all children fully enjoy the right to education. To guarantee children's health rights, namely by assuring that they are protected from unsafe vaccinations and blood transfusions. Completely abolish the death penalty and adopt an immediate de facto moratorium. Inscribe a legal definition of discrimination in order to enhance equality between men and women. Ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and ratify the optional protocol on the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, as well as the optional protocol to the Convention of the Rights of the Child on a Communications Procedure. I thank you.
Thank you, Portugal. Qatar is next.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس. نشكر وفد الصين على
Thank you, President. Thank you. I'd like to welcome the distinguished delegation of China and congratulate them on the presentation of their report. We have 2 recommendations. 1, continue efforts to reduce the income gap between rural areas and cities when it comes to services of education and healthcare, particularly in favor of rural areas. We welcome efforts of the Chinese government to improve the human rights situation and the adoption of a national plan 2016-2020, as well as efforts to promote economic development and to combat poverty.
Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. We warmly welcome the delegation of China and would like to offer the following recommendations. First, to continue its efforts to improve human rights institutions, in particular to ratify the ICCPR and to establish an independent NHRI. Second, to strengthen efforts in accordance with the ICESCR and the guiding principles on business and human rights in reducing the adverse environmental effects of industrialization, including air pollution. Third, to redouble efforts to bridge the gap in economic and social development between rural and urban areas. Taking note of the progress in seeking the SDGs, we hope China to better address some outstanding problems of unbalanced development. We believe transforming the largest developing country could be more sustainable when it is underpinned by the values of human rights.
Republic of Moldova.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Moldova welcomes the distinguished delegation of China. We commend China for its remarkable achievements with regard to poverty alleviation, improving universal access to social security, including basic old age pensions, basic medical care, and the minimum living standard scheme. We welcome the significant reduction in maternal and child mortality, as well as the adoption of the law against domestic violence. We recommend China the following: continue implementing policies directed towards policy alleviation with a particular focus on access to services such as education, healthcare, and social security to all migrant workers from rural areas. And second, pursue measures to address the gender pay gap, including by adopting legislation regarding the principle of equal pay.
Next speaker is Russian Federation.
Thank you. The Russian Federation is grateful to the delegation of China for their comprehensive presentation and responses to questions. We highly rate China's efforts to develop a system of legislative protection of human rights. We recommend continue improving it in line with international commitments of Beijing. We note the work of the Chinese authorities to promote and protect the rights of national minorities, expanding their participation in state governance. We also commend steps to reform the system of regulating the work of social organizations, including through the law on regulation of activities within the country of foreign NGOs. We recommend that China continues to provide the legal protection of the activities of foreign NGOs as foreseen by that law. We also welcome active participation of China in the field of human rights, and we recommend China continues its efforts to provide interested states technical assistance in the field of human rights.
Rwanda warmly welcomes the delegation of China and thanks them for the presentation of the national report and the update just provided. Rwanda commends China's continued effort to promote and protect human rights, including through implementation of policies to improve the social and economic well-being of its citizens. Rwanda recommends that China strengthen measures to combat violence against women and domestic violence, including through enhancing existing legislation to better ensure accountability for victims. Consider further limitations on the use of the death penalty with a view to imposing a de facto moratorium on its use, aiming at its total abolition. We wish China every success in the implementation of the accepted recommendations of this review, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Rwanda. We move to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, President. I'd like to welcome the delegation of China, and we commend the opening of China to cultures and religions and civilizations. We recommend as follows: continue promoting fair, equal education accessible to all, to continue friendly exchanges in the field of cultural and religious issues, to promote reciprocal mutual understanding, and also accord greater attention to persons with disabilities. Thank you.
I move the floor to Senegal.
Thank you, President. We'd like to greet the Chinese delegation and congratulate them for the quality of the national report. We commend the significant progress achieved by China since the second UPR cycle in improving its legal institutional framework for protection and promotion of human rights in the National Action Plan. We recommend that China continue its efforts by bolstering its cooperation and continuing the process of ratification of appropriate instruments. In conclusion, we wish China every success in its UPR and in implementing recommendations that it accepts. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. Next speaker is Serbia.
Mr. President, the Republic of Serbia welcomes the presentation of the national report by the delegation of China. We appreciate that the Chinese government has actively implemented recommendations received during the second UPR. Serbia particularly recognizes that China has efficiently strengthened its judicial guarantee of human rights by constantly improving the legal system of human rights protection. We recommend China the following: to continue to improve the laws and policies for Chinese women to take part in decision making, to continue to give attention to the urban residents who have migrated from rural areas, especially the issue of housing of those in need. We wish China every success in implementing the recommendations of this cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Serbia. I move the floor now to Seychelles.
Thank you, Mr. President. Seychelles welcomes the delegation of China and puts forward the following two recommendations. Firstly, in commending China's ongoing efforts in increasing the use of renewable energy sources and the reduction of carbon emissions, Seychelles recommends that China continue to intensify measures to implement the Paris Agreement in view of the undeniable impact of climate change on the enjoyment of fundamental human rights. Secondly, Seychelles recommends the timely establishment of a national human rights institution that is in line with the Paris Principles and provided with adequate resources to fulfill a wide-ranging mandate. Seychelles wishes the delegation of China a fruitful session and a successful implementation of the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. Next on our list is Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone notes with deep appreciation the huge financial and technical assistance provided to her and several African nations during the outbreak of the Ebola epidemic in Sierra Leone and the West African sub-region. Sierra Leone congratulates China's efforts in improving human rights and encourages them as follows. 1. Ratify the International Covenant of People's Rights and accede to the ICRMW and ICPPED. Establish an independent human rights institution which is in conformity with the Paris Principles. And thirdly, continue to strengthen public health education strategies and support NGO efforts in promoting community health services and social development. Sierra Leone wishes China success in the third review cycle.
Thank you. I recognize Singapore as the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Singapore welcomes China's progress in enhancing the well-being and prosperity of its people since its last UPR through measures such as the Third National Human Rights Action Plan and the effective implementation of its 13th five-year plan. We commend in particular its success in lifting over 68 million people out of poverty since its last review. We recommend the following in support of China's quest to address unbalanced and inadequate development. First, continue to invest in improving the conditions of schools in remote areas. Second, continue to strengthen health services in rural areas, including community elder care services. Singapore has been an active supporter of China's reforms and opening up, and will continue to do so and support China's peaceful development. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Singapore. Slovenia.
Mr. President, Slovenia would like to thank the distinguished delegation of China for its commitment to the UPR process. We wish to recommend 1. To ensure access to quality education for all children in line with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. 2. To give priority to protecting the rights of girl children by ensuring that all girls are registered at birth, implement wide awareness-raising campaigns on the human rights of the girls, and promote their education. And 3. To increase transparency regarding death penalty by publishing statistics of the total number of executions, and to establish as soon as possible a moratorium on the death penalty as a first step towards abolition of the death penalty. And finally, we welcome the adoption of the National Human Rights Action Plan as well as the Gender Action Plan, and we encourage the government to work with the civil society.
Thank you very much. South Africa is next.
Mr. President, China continues to serve as a global leader on people-centered development and poverty eradication, as well as a formidable defender of multilateralism. Notably, at the last UPR, China accepted 80% of the recommendations made to it. We commend China on legislative reforms it has made, including 28 new laws enacted on human rights, in particular on violence against women. South Africa recommends that China continues defending multilateralism and in particular its role in providing leadership on climate change where it's sorely needed. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. South Sudan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. President. South Sudan welcomes China UPR report and appreciates the tremendous achievement in right to development. My country commend China for fairness, accessibility, and balanced developments in maternal and child health services, poverty reductions, improvement of people's livelihood, as well as enhancing the capacity of the least developed countries. We appreciate China for zero tariff to 97% products from 37 least developed countries and cuts taxes by 1.3 billion RMB in 2017. Finally, South Sudan congratulates China for her 5-sphere integrated plan, which aims at economic, political, cultural...
Thank you. I invite Spain to take the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much. President Spain wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of the Popular Republic of China, and we thank them for their participation in this UPR. We recommend 1, applying public policy to protect human rights defenders in line with international standards. 2, establish a moratorium on the death penalty as a step prior to absolute abolition. 3, to streamline implementation of an Initiative 5125 of the Framework Law on Disability. Thank you.
Thank you, Spain. Sri Lanka, you have the floor.
President, Sri Lanka welcomes the delegation of China led by the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. We recognize the progressive steps by the Chinese government in promotion and protection of human rights. My delegation recommends to China: 1, accede to the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. 2, further improve access to education for children, especially those living in rural areas and children of migrant workers. 3, take further steps to consolidate programs and actions aimed at improving public health care, including further reducing maternal and infant mortality. Finally, we wish the People's Republic of China success in its UPR engagement. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. The State of Palestine welcomes the delegation of China and thanks them for the comprehensive presentation. We commend the efforts by China since the last cycle of the UPR towards the promotion and protection of human rights, including in the area of business and human rights, and the progress achieved in addressing abuses and violations by corporations that have adverse environmental, social, and human rights impact on certain individuals and communities. In this regard, we recommend China to take further measures on business and human rights in line with its international obligations and to ensure that companies operating in high risk or conflict areas conduct human rights due diligence in line with the United Nations guiding principles. We wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. We continue with Sudan.
Mr. President, the delegation of Sudan warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of China. My delegation appreciates China's effort to expand the social security network and would like to present to China the following. Number 1, accelerate the development of prevention and control system for safe production to effectively protect the safety of workers. 2, further improve the social assistance system to ensure the basic living of the low income and especially needy people. 3, promote parents' development of compulsory education and equalization of the basic public service in urban and rural area. We wish all the success to China in its review.
Thank you, Excellency. Sweden is next.
Mr. President, Sweden welcomes the delegation of China and would like to make the following recommendations. To take urgent steps to respect the rights of persons belonging to ethnic minorities, including the rights to peaceful assembly, to manifest religion and culture, in particular in Xinjiang in Tibet. To remove restrictions on freedom of expression and press, including the internet, that are not in accordance with international law. to ensure full enjoyment of human rights for women, girls and individuals of all sexual orientations and gender identities by implementing the anti-domestic violence law and clearly defining its coverage, respecting the rights of all detainees under relevant human rights instruments and the Vienna Convention, including due process. Sweden wishes the government of China all success in the current review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Sweden. Switzerland is next speaker.
Monsieur le Président,
President, Switzerland recommends that China should respect all human rights of the Tibetan people and other minorities, including the importance of a safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment, which is vital for the enjoyment of a number of these rights. We are concerned about repression. We therefore recommend that China put an end to house arrest in specific areas, specifically with regards to human rights defenders and lawyers. We recommend that all re-education centres be closed in Uyghur areas and that visits by the High Commissioner and the special procedures to Xinjiang be facilitated. With regards to the legislation on domestic violence, we recommend in particular that obligations vis-à-vis women victims that result from this should be implemented as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Syrian Arab Republic, the floor goes to you.
ترحب الجمهورية العربية السورية.
The Syrian Arab Republic would like to welcome the high-level delegation. We much appreciate the implementation since the previous UPR cycle of various actions such as the law against terrorism. We recommend that China continue its promotion and protection of human rights on the basis of the Charter and international human rights instruments. We would like to make the following recommendations: that China should take further measures to counter religious factions and extremist religious movements, and could continue its struggle against terrorism and separatism, and to ensure the sovereignty and integrity of the Chinese territory, and to pursue the protection and ensuring peace and stability in the country so that everyone can enjoy human rights.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to thank and welcome Chinese delegation and congratulate them with the significant progress done. And Tajikistan wishes to make the following recommendations. First, adhere in supply-side reform and promote the sustainable and sound economic and social development in Xinjiang Autonomous Region. Second, improve radio and television coverage and service quality in remote areas. Third, advance renovation of dilapidated houses in rural areas in accordance with the national conditions. And lastly, Tajikistan wishes to a successful review to Chinese delegation. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. We continue with Thailand.
Mr. President, Thailand welcomes the delegation of China to the third cycle of the UPR. Thailand applauds China's commitment to promoting and protecting human rights, especially through constructive dialogue and multilateral cooperation. Thailand welcomes the progress made in poverty reduction and people-centered development. Thailand commends China promoting human rights education and training among youth and law enforcement officers. Thailand recommends the following for China's consideration. First, further enhance international cooperation in the field of human rights and the SDGs, including through technical cooperation and capacity building and South-South cooperation. Second, continue efforts to develop measures to eliminate discrimination against persons who have disabilities pursuant to the CRPD. We wish China every success in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our list is Timor-Leste.
President, Timor-Leste is grateful that China accepted its recommendations made in the previous UPR review session, namely, first, to adjust and specify the applicable conditions for the adoptions of the compulsory measures such as arrest, release on bail pending trial and residential surveillance, and second, to inform the suspect of their rights and obligations in timely manner in accordance with the law, as well to actively create conditions for lawyers to get involved in lawsuits from the stage of the criminal investigation. Finally, while acknowledging the efforts of China in the implementation of the all-accepted recommendation, Timor-Leste wishes China a great success and all the best in the review session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Togo.
Monsieur le Président,
President, We would like warmly to welcome the Chinese delegation, and we would like to thank the delegation for its detailed presentation of the national report. We congratulate the government on its commitment in favor of human rights. We particularly appreciate measures taken by the government which have considerably reduced poverty and improved the welfare of people in society, in particular including vulnerable people. And we would like to make the following recommendations: that China set up a national human rights institution which is in keeping with the Paris Principles and should continue to reinforce the rights of vulnerable groups in society. We wish China every success under the UPR.
I thank you. I recognize Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Chair. Trinidad and Tobago wishes to express its appreciation to the People's Republic of China for the presentation of its third cycle report. We take note of efforts to improve the well-being of its citizens as outlined therein since the previous cycle. These relate to the reduction in the incidence of poverty to 3.1% at the end of 2017, the Joined-in Guardianship Growing Together campaign to strengthen intervention and assistance for vulnerable children, the upgrading of drinking water conditions for 95.09 million rural residents, and measures for bettering the living conditions for registered poor households. Trinidad and Tobago extends its best wishes to China for a productive review, and as it strives towards overcoming the challenges it has identified in its report and addressing the recommendations made in the implementation period to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our list is Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. نرحب.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to welcome the delegation of China and thank them for the report testifying to China's commitment to the UPR. And we also welcome the steps taken to reduce poverty, achieve development, and realize economic and social rights. We'd like to make the following recommendations: to complete the consideration of setting up a national human rights institution according to Paris Principles, to continue with legislative, judicial, administrative reforms to prepare for accession to the ICCR, and continue efforts to promote women's rights, and to pursue efforts to promote children's rights. Finally, we would like to wish the China success. Thank you.
Turkey.
Turkey welcomes the recent progress made by China in the field of human rights as indicated in its national report. Notably, the efforts to alleviate poverty in society, including among ethnic communities, improved conditions to access healthcare services, which has increased the average life expectancy and reduced infant mortality. That said, China should continue its efforts to improve overall conditions in all parts of the country, especially among ethnic groups who are concerned to protect their distinct identity, religion, and language. While Chinese government's alert against extremism could be plausible, there are concerns raised regarding some administrative practices which involve restrictions on basic rights and liberties, like confinement of individuals without any legal ground and their separation from families and society. In this respect, we encourage the government to work closely with the international community and to ensure recognition of universal human rights for all the population.
Turkmenistan is next.
Mr. President, Turkmenistan welcomes the high-level delegation of China to the UPR working group session and thanks for its comprehensive update. Turkmenistan proposes the following recommendations: to work on the strengthening international cooperation in the field of human rights through its National Human Rights Action Plan 1620, to continue promoting the freedom of the religious belief and, in accordance with law, safeguard social and religious harmony among its people, to continue increasing per capita income for both urban and rural residents. My delegation wishes further success to China in the implementation of the recommendations. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency. Uganda, the floor goes to you.
Thank you, President. Uganda welcomes the delegation of China. We note the positive developments in the country since the last review, including steps taken towards achieving social equity by the expansion of the social security network. We make the following recommendations. 1. Continue to develop education and medical services in the less developed regions of the country. 2. Continue to develop agricultural technology in order to further promote food security. We wish China a successful review. I thank you, President.
Thank you. Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ukraine commends China's adherence to review process. We positively note the efforts taken by China, including in line with our second cycle recommendations to improve the institutional and legislative framework on human rights, in particular a number of national action plans, as well as the adoption of the law on ombudsman. Ukraine would like to recommend to ratify ICCPR and ICPPE, to elaborate comprehensive anti-trafficking legislation which provides for criminalization of all forms of trafficking, and to strengthen cooperation with the HRC special procedures, including receiving visits requested so far. We wish the delegation of China a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Ukraine. United Arab Emirates, the floor goes to you.
السيد الرئيس نرحب بوفد جمهورية الصين الشعبية.
President, we would like to welcome the Chinese delegation led by the Deputy Foreign Minister. We welcome all the measures that have been taken to bolster the judicial branch of government and support human rights and enhance the rule of law. We have two recommendations: that the country should modify the minimum wage criterion and guidelines on a salary scale, and it should protect the interests of people with disabilities to ensure development for the entire people in society. Thank you.
What is yours?
Thank you, Mr. President. The UK welcomes progress on economic rights and reductions in death penalty offences. However, political and civil rights have deteriorated, including increased restrictions on the freedoms of assembly, association, expression and religion or belief. We're very concerned about the treatment of ethnic minorities, including Uyghurs and Tibetans. We urge China to respect the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Sino-British Joint Declaration in Hong Kong. We recommend that China first ratify the ILO's Forced Labour Convention and its 2014 protocol. Second, implement third recommendations on Xinjiang and allow the UN unrestricted access to monitor implementation. And three, ratify the ICCPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency. United Republic of Tanzania, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tanzania welcomes the delegation of China. We wish to commend China on various initiatives it has undertaken in putting in place a number of legal frameworks in order to bring them in line with the relevant international convention and standards. We also commend China on its economic achievement, which has lifted millions of its citizens out of poverty, including the construction of affordable houses in rural and urban areas. Furthermore, Tanzania appreciates China's generous assistance and support provided to developing countries congruent to their development endeavors. Tanzania recommends to China, one, to continue implementing the care subsidy system for persons with disabilities, to further promote awareness of the whole society on protecting the rights and interests of human
Tanzania,
employees.
time's up. United States of America, the floor is
Thank
yours.
you, Mr. President. We are alarmed by the government of China's worsening crackdown on Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Muslims in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. We recommend that China, 1, abolish all forms of arbitrary detention, including internment camps in Xinjiang, and immediately release the hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, of individuals detained in these camps. 2, cease harassment and extraterritorial abduction of human rights defenders and their family members. Cease house arrest and travel restrictions for people based on their rights defense work, and release those imprisoned for such work, including Ta Shi Wangchuk, Ilam Ta Ti, Huang Qi, Wang Chuo, and Zhang. 3, amend the definition of subversion to remove all exercise of an individual's human rights and fundamental freedoms from its scope. 4, cease interference in the selection and education of religious leaders such as Tibetan Buddhist lamas.
Thank you. Time's up. Uruguay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. President Uruguay welcomes the progress made by China in promoting and protecting the rights of women. We encourage the country to redouble its efforts in that field, to bolster China's commitment to the universal system for the promotion and protection of human rights. We recommend as follows: accelerate ratification of the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, and adopt an anti-discrimination law in the public and private labour spheres, which would guarantee to all people equitable, non-discriminatory treatment in the workplace. Finally, convinced of the benefit of independent mechanisms for promotion and protection of human rights, Uruguay recommends establishing a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. Thank you.
Thank you, Uruguay. Uzbekistan.
President, we welcome the Chinese delegation. We much appreciate the consistent efforts made by the country to promote and protect human rights, including political, civil, social and cultural rights and the right to development of all people in the country and throughout the country. We are satisfied to note the adoption of a second national plan for human rights 2016-2020 and the judicial reform and the attention being paid to socio-economic development of the regions by the government. Our recommendations, firstly, to continue the training of personnel in human rights and to enhance awareness of human rights. And secondly, to take measures to ensure the right to development throughout the country, including the most far-flung regions of the country. We wish the delegation every success under this UPR review.
Thank you very much. Angola, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, President. The Republic of Angola warmly welcomes the China delegation and thanks for the presentation of its report. Angola recommends China the following: to take the necessary measure in line with the provision of international treaties to ensure the full exercise of the rights of people with disability, to continue to provide assistance to low-income groups in urban and rural areas, to further improve laws and regulations regarding the rights and interests of workers and labor unions. Angola wishes China a successful UPR.
Thank you, Angola. Maldives, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Maldives warmly welcomes the delegation of China and appreciates their presentation today. The Maldives is encouraged by the efforts of the Chinese government to promote the rights of women and welcomes the 2016 anti-domestic violence law. We also acknowledge the priority given by the Chinese government to ensure employment through its economic and social development policies. In constructive spirit, the Maldives recommends China to continue efforts to speed up pollution governance in coastal waters. We encourage China to enact and improve laws to prevent employment discrimination. We wish China a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Mali.
President, we would like to welcome the Chinese delegation and thank them for presenting their report. The report demonstrates that China is determined to protect human rights, and this is via the implementation of the third National Action Plan for Human Rights to ensure the socio-economic development of the country. And much progress has been achieved in protecting the economic, social, cultural rights of the people in the country. We'd like to make the following recommendations: that China accelerate the ratification of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and China should ensure the setting up of a national human rights body. We wish China every success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mali. And last speaker on our list is Venezuela.
Thank you, President. Venezuela shares the humanist concept of China on cooperation for the enjoyment of human rights with security and stability, development as a fundamental human right, and the need to eliminate poverty to guarantee those rights. These are concepts with broad international support. We recommend: 1. Eliminate absolute poverty and build a prosperous society for 2020 and convert China into a strong socialist, democratic and culturally advanced country by 2050. 2. Continue promoting a people-centered development focus. 3. Continue forging new forms of international relations with mutual respect, equity, justice, mutual cooperation for a shared future for all human beings. We wish China every success in its UPR. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. And with this statement, we have exhausted our speakers list. Please know that the delivered statements will be posted on the UPR extranet, provided that they have been uploaded in Word format in the same online system the delegations used for the inscription on the list of speakers. I'll now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Yucheng and his delegation to respond to the questions and comments and to make their final remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, just now some delegates continue their comments and statements. We have listened to them with patience and care. I have noted what was said by U.S. delegate that we welcome the U.S. delegate returning to this council. I would like to respond to some of the questions regarding international cooperation. on human rights. First, China has always, with a responsible attitude, earnestly implementing its international obligation on the convention. It has succeeded. About the ICCPR, China has been making legal preparations for this. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has headed a working group for this purpose. About the 53 provisions of convention we are studying them. About Rome Statute, China is in good communication and cooperation with the ICC. We hope the ICC will garner wider competent support with its practice. About the implementation of obligations that China has executed to an international human rights obligation and the recommendations made during the second cycle in respect to our attitudes is very clear that we honor our words, implement our commitments. Take this UPR, for example. In the second UPR cycle, China accepted 204 recommendations out of 252, accounting for 81% of the total. Soon after the review, China, there was a working group headed by FA set up to implement. For example, the ITL has been repealed, anti-domestic violence taking effect, and family policy planning policy being adjusted. Number of offences punishable by death penalty has been narrowed. China has been constructively engaged in cooperation with human rights mechanisms. We have received visits by several procedures, including the arbitrary detention working group, and just now, in the statement by the head delegation of China, we have extended invitation to the Human Rights High Commissioner and the mechanisms regarding the right to development, the right to the elderly and people with disabilities, and we will continue to adopt an open attitude in this regard. Now I'd like to invite the United Work Front and Xinjiang, Tibet, and relevant working committees, our colleagues in these institutions, to make their answers. Thank you. Some UK and some other delegations talked about human rights in Tibet.
One, freedom of religion in Tibet. China, in line with the law, protects people's freedom of religions and belief, and Tibet is no exception. Tibet has 1,787 venues for all kinds of practices, averagely one for each 1,790 people. There are 46,000 monks and nuns, or 1.4% of the Tibetan population. I'm from Tibet. Almost every believer in Tibet has a scripture hall or niche at home. And every year, millions of people come to Tibet for prayers. And everywhere in Tibet, the prayer flags, wheels, and prayers can be seen. 2, the protection of Tibetan language and culture. China's constitution stipulates that all ethnic groups have the right to use and develop their own language and characters. The autonomous region also has specific regulations in this regard. All laws, documents, radio and television programs are in both Tibetan and Mandarin. All schools have Tibetan classes and do teach in bilingual languages. The encoded Tibetan is now up to the national and international standard and has become the first minority language that has international standard in China. The bilingual education is not targeted to any particular ethnic group. This will not weaken the minority language, but instead will help enhance the exchange and unity among all ethnic groups, and is in line with the laws and the interest of our people. Most of the countries around the world have English as an option to include in bilingual language. No one questions that, and no one upgrades it to the level of culture assimilation and encroachment. Thank you. Regarding the UK, the US, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden statement on the anti-terrorism in Xinjiang. Since 1990s, separatist, extremist and terrorist forces have planned and carried out violent terrorist attacks, thousands of them, and
equality and trampled on the right to life, to health, and to property and development. And now we have taken a series of anti-terror measures.
Telephone too close to your mic, so please remove it from the mic. Okay, you can continue now, yes.
The Xinjiang vocational training is making use of vocational training institution, mainly for learning of legal knowledge, vocational skills, languages, and combating extremism. The process is as follows. The training institution signed an agreement with the trainees with concentrated training, boarding, training in practice, providing free of charge vocational training with diploma after exams. And they respect and protect the customs and habits of different ethnic groups and different faiths. It does not target any specific ethnic groups and nothing to do with religion. Even less can we talk about religious discrimination. And this has based on law. We based ourselves on constitution, on the regional ethnic autonomy law and law on legislation in connection with the local situation, and has formulated certain methods, and on regulation on anti-extremism. On those who have been coerced, lured into terrorist activities, on those with minor offenses, we have the policy of strict fight, but also combined with education and rescue, so that we build a defense guarding against infiltration of terrorism and extremism. These measures have had preliminary results, and we've combined this with protection of human rights to rescue these people with minor offenses so that they may not fall victim again to terrorism and extremism. The great majority of trainees can reflect seriously and learn about the nature and harm of terrorism and religious extremism. They are full of confidence in their future now. Thank you.
新疆乌鲁木齐市市长，也是一名土生土长的维吾尔族。
Yashin Shidi, I'm the mayor of the Xinjiang municipality. I'm also a native Uyghur. I'd like to respond to a question about the educational and the vocational training in Xinjiang. First, the extreme terrorism in Xinjiang was quite serious, seriously undermining stability, tranquility in the locality, and aroused strong indignation from the people. With these measures, the space for terrorism has been narrowed, and space for life and work of people has been widened. For consecutive 22 months, there has been no incidents of violent terrorist cases. The local populace applauded this effort. They had long hoped for the government to take action to nip it at its bud, and to take resolute actions not to let it run rampant. Secondly, the efforts of the anti-terror and the maintaining stability efforts are paying off. 2017, the GDP grows by 7.6%. Some say traveling to Xinjiang is subject to restriction. Now I have a figure. In the first 9 months this year, the region has received 132 million visitors from China and from abroad, up 40% over the same period. Many people visiting to Xinjiang, they are impressed in the Xinjiang. It's beautiful, very safe and stable. A small number of Western countries make various allegations which are seriously far away from facts. The most concerned, the biggest concern of the population is stability, and they don't want terrorism, they want economic development, they don't want poverty, and they want to harmonious relations and not to have a confrontation. Thirdly, these training centers have been welcomed by the attendees. After graduation, they can acquire 1 to 2 vocational skills, and they can have good remuneration through labor by piecework wage on top of their basic wage, and they say they have been received good protection. Some attendees say they were influenced by the extreme thoughts. They never took part in cultural and sports activities. They have never thought that life could be so colorful and so meaningful. Some are also saying there's excessive efforts in anti-terrorism and allegation of ethnic discrimination, and there were no good or bad elements of terrorist activity. They should all be punished by law, and we should use the anti-terror law as the sole legal criteria to make anti-terror efforts, link them with specific regions, religion, and ethnic group is with ulterior motive. Lastly, I will say Xinjiang is a nice place. Welcome to Xinjiang. Thank you very much.
2个问题多下回答。
I'd like to respond to two questions. Just now, the Greece and other over 20 countries mentioned about the Chinese National Human Rights Action Plan. China has adopted 3 successive human rights plans with over 40 government departments and organs took part in the National Committee, the Standing Committee of NPC, exercise supervision, and NGOs took part in the formulation and evaluation. The countries like Equatorial Guinea mentioned human rights education in China. In the last 5 years, the Information Office of State Council, together with 8 national human rights education training centers, their cooperation have held 206 training courses, training over 25,000 persons, and also we strengthened the education of human rights in primary and middle school students and universities. We thank South Africa, Sweden, Venezuela, Mexico, and other countries for their question about anti-domestic violence law. Since its introduction in 2016, we have multiple measures to implement it. We have publicity and training, for example, published a guidebook and simplified readers on the law, and adopt institutional arrangements. The public security organs promulgated the detailed provisions for the implementation. The Supreme People's Court made a judicial interpretation, making personal safety protection order as a separate ground for prosecution, and enhanced legal aid and other measures. Thank you very much. We thank Brazil, Cameroon, Italy, and other countries for their concern about the rights of persons with disabilities. On the whole, 85 million persons with disabilities, their rights to subsistence has been well protected, and the right to development is being better realized. With the government playing a primary role, social organizations are encouraged to take part. This is a distinctive feature of China's protection system for the persons with disabilities. Over the years, they have played an ever important role in this endeavor. Thank you. Mr. President, next, I'd like to respond to what was mentioned by Her Excellency, Ambassador of South Africa of China, to do effort to promote multilateralism. I'd like to say China will firmly adhere to the protection of multilateralism and also international multilateral system with United Nations at its core. However, because there were so many questions and recommendations put forward to China delegation, there is only one recommendation I can make to you, that is to maintenance of multilateralism needs our common effort. We hope this can be included into next year's work plan of every country. Now I'd like to invite the head of delegation, Minister Allek, to respond to further questions and to make concluding remarks.
In recent years, from our own experiences and from the international cooperation, we've accumulated lots of lessons in terms of anti-terrorism. Stability is the most important. Prevention should be put first, and we should deal with the root causes and symptoms. Prevention is an effective measure to curb terrorism. Xinjiang, in terms of the anti-terrorism needs, set up the training centers. This is to help those people affected by terrorism to stay away from the extremism in the means of training, so that they could be integrated into society at early date and prevent them from the participants and victims of terrorism. We cannot wait till they have become a member of the terrorism, then we take measures to deal with them. This measure is to protect the human rights of majority of people, and for these people themselves, this is a way to save them. This is a positive effort to explore the way of anti-terrorism in Xinjiang. Actually, we've inspired from many other countries' experiences in this regard. For instance, in Europe, many countries have, in high school, have the courses of anti-extremism, and they have regulations to ban the burqas and have measures to supervise those people who have the motivation. Therefore, setting up the training center is a preventative measure to combat terrorism, and this is one of the key contributions made by China in this regard. This is my response in this regard. In the end, I would like to do a concluding remark.
Mr. President, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, just now, the Chinese delegation engaged in a constructive dialogue with countries represented here in open, candid, inclusive and cooperative spirit. And we have listened attentively to all interventions. An overwhelming number of countries have fully recognized China's efforts and achievements in promoting and protecting human rights over the last 5 years. They have shown their understanding of the difficulties and challenges that China faces as the largest developing country and made many constructive comments and recommendations. On behalf of the Chinese delegation, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to all of these countries. At the same time, some countries seem to be more critical and have expressed concerns about the human rights situation in China. For all the recommendations that are constructive and made in good faith, we will seriously consider and accept them. For any doubt caused by misunderstanding, we are willing to deepen mutual understanding, build trust, and dispel misgivings through increased communication and exchanges. That said, we will not accept the politically driven accusations from a few countries that are fraught with biases and in total disregard of facts. Even less will we entertain attempts to use human rights as an excuse to interfere in China's internal affairs or undermine its sovereignty and territorial integrity. No country shall dictate the definition and criteria of democracy and human rights or impose its own standards on others. What China has achieved shows that there is more than just one path toward modernization, and every country may choose its own path of development and model of human rights protection in the context of its national circumstances and its people's needs. Both the UN Charter and universally recognized norms of international law underscore the respect for countries' sovereignty, independence, integrity, and independent choice of development path. When it comes to human rights in China, the Chinese people have the best say. With ever-growing living standards, the nearly 1.4 billion Chinese citizens have their lawful rights and interests protected by the Constitution and other laws. They now have a greater sense of fulfillment, happiness, and security. On the land of 9.6 million square kilometers of China, there is no war, no conflict, no fear, no forced displacement. We hope that some countries will view China's human rights in a comprehensive, objective, and impartial light, put an end to political biases and tainted lenses, put an end to the confrontational approach, politicize human rights issues and double standards, and truly return to the principle of objectivity, impartiality, and non-selectivity established in the institution building of the Human Rights Council. Mr. President, to conclude, let me reaffirm that the Chinese government attaches great importance to the UPR and sees it as an important opportunity to honor our human rights commitments and seek the broadest possible views. We will seriously consider the various recommendations, put them in the context of China's realities, and present China's response to the Council within the given time frame. China will continue to take an active part in international human rights exchanges and cooperation and work with all countries for the sound advancement of international human rights. Here I wish to thank Mr. President, the Troika, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Secretariat, as well as all countries for your efforts in this review. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. Since we still have some time to Mr. Zhang Yun, Deputy Head of Delegation, for some concluding remarks. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, I'm very honored to report to you that so far the Chinese delegation has fulfilled all the statements and comments on the part of the Chinese delegation, and also in terms of responses. We are glad that within the prescribed time we have accomplished our task, and the remaining time will be left to you. And take this opportunity to thank Mr. President once again for the excellent work and effort. Thank the members of the Presidium and also all the working staff of Secretariat, and also thanks to all the delegates and for your constructive active participation and useful contribution. Thank you very much once again.
I thank you. I thank Your Excellency and the whole delegation for the presentation and participation in this review today. The report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, namely the representatives of Hungary, Kenya and Saudi Arabia. In accordance with the procedure implemented since 2015, the recommendations section will be distributed on Thursday, 8 November at 12:30 p.m. for adoption on Friday, 9 November as from 3 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by email on Friday, 23 November 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our meeting. We will reconvene this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. for the review of Nigeria. Speaking time will be 1 minute for all. You are kindly invited to ensure that your statements are deliverable in this time limit. Finally, I invite all of you to be in the room on time. The meeting is hereby closed.